A rich man hired a server girl to pretend to be his wife. In the end, he uncovers something that changes everything. What happens next? Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Marcus Stone stood at the tall windows of his Manhattan office, his gaze fixed on the sprawling cityscape below. He was 39, with dark hair neatly combed back and a posture that spoke of self-confidence. Some would even call it arrogance. Yet, on this particular afternoon, there was a tightness in his features that betrayed his usual composure. The office around him was all glass and steel, reflecting the modern empire he commanded. But deep within those imposing walls, uncertainty pulsed. His longtime lawyer and family advisor, Andrew Wallace, sat across a gleaming desk, flipping through the paperwork that Marcus had dreaded for months. "You must present a legal spouse by the end of the year," Andrew said, his voice calm but insistent. "Your grandfather's will is explicit. Without fulfilling that clause, you lose the lion's share of the inheritance, and those shares go to outside parties who are waiting for the slightest misstep." Marcus inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of decades of family legacy. He had known about this clause ever since he was in college, but he had never taken it seriously. Marriage, in his mind, was a personal choice. He wasn't about to tie the knot just to appease a piece of paper. Yet the Stone Enterprises empire, worth billions, could fall into the hands of rival shareholders if he didn't comply. "I'm not ready to marry anyone," he muttered, tossing the pages onto his desk. "This is ridiculous. My grandfather wanted to manipulate me from the grave." Andrew offered a measured shrug. He wanted to ensure there would be a stable family structure to carry on his legacy. "Whether you agree or not, the clock is ticking." A knock at the door interrupted them. Enter David Brooks, a close friend and financial advisor to Marcus. David was in his early 40s, a bit older than Marcus, but their friendship went back to business school. With a confident stride, David approached and glanced between Marcus and Andrew, sensing the tension in the room. "I take it you've reached the worst part of the will," he said, raising an eyebrow. Marcus simply nodded. Meanwhile, across the East River in Brooklyn, Rachel Cooper was finishing her shift at a small, family-owned restaurant where she had been working the past few years. 35 years old, with warm brown eyes and shoulder-length, light brown hair, she exuded a quiet determination. The stress of overdue bills weighed on her. She had just received a letter demanding payment for medical debts left behind after her mother's passing, a blow that threatened her already precarious finances. Rachel finished wiping down tables while her friend and co-worker, Lisa Morgan, stacked chairs. Lisa was cheerful and lively, a contrast to Rachel's more reserved demeanor. "I'm sorry about those bills," Lisa said, sighing sympathetically. "You can't catch a break these days, can you?" Shrugging, Rachel forced a smile. "Life's never been easy, but I'll manage. I have to." There was a fierceness in her voice rooted in years of struggle. She had grown up listening to her father's stories about working with the Stone family, stories that always ended in bitterness and regret. Though she never fully understood what had gone wrong, Rachel carried a deeply ingrained resentment toward the wealthy elites. She believed that somewhere in those corporate towers, the Stone name was responsible for her father's ruin. Later that evening, as Rachel was leaving the restaurant, a tall man in a tailored suit stepped inside. She recognized him as one of the occasional customers who preferred a quiet corner and minimal fuss. It was David Brooks, though she only knew him as that polite patron. Lisa, who handled the checks at the register, served him with her usual friendly chatter, and Rachel overheard him mention he was looking for someone with a particular skill set, an unusual request, but something about the way he said it piqued her curiosity. Unaware of each other's identities, Rachel and David crossed paths at the doorway. He offered a courteous nod, and she did the same, though her mind was far away, focused on her debts and the possibility that she might soon lose her modest apartment. She brushed off the fleeting thought that this elegant stranger might hold any significance to her life. After all, she had her problems to solve, and no well-dressed businessman was going to change that. That night, Marcus found himself alone in his penthouse, wrestling with the ultimatum. "Get married or lose everything," echoed in his mind. He recalled how his late grandfather, Arthur Stone, had been a traditionalist, always saying that a strong family was the backbone of a respectable empire. Marcus had dismissed those lectures when he was younger, convinced that business acumen alone could sustain success. Now, facing the very real threat of losing his company to hostile board members or cunning investors, he realized he needed a plan, and fast. But the idea of marriage, especially one orchestrated for business, gnawed at him. Love, trust, companionship, none of these had factored heavily into his life. He had grown accustomed to transactional relationships, high-stakes deals, and a world where everything had a price. Then the thought dawned on him, what if I pay someone to be my wife? The notion felt cynical, even grotesque. Yet desperation has a way of making the unthinkable seem plausible. Marcus's expression tightened as he considered what that arrangement would look like. 6 months, maybe a year, a tidy sum of money, and all the appearances of a genuine marriage. Nobody else would have to know, if it secured his inheritance and protected his father's legacy. No, his legacy. Perhaps that was the only solution. Before he switched off the lights for the evening, Marcus Stone resolved to bring this plan to Andrew and David. It was unorthodox, but in his world, unorthodox strategies often yielded the greatest results. Little did he know that across the river, a woman named Rachel Cooper was about to be pulled into his life in ways neither of them could imagine. Late the next morning, Marcus sat in the same office, rereading the will's stipulations. David Brooks stood by the panoramic window, admiring the bustling streets below. Andrew Wallace hovered with a sense of guarded optimism. "I've thought about it," Marcus began, voice steady but thick with reluctance, "and I'm prepared to hire someone to play the role of my wife. I need to maintain control of Stone Enterprises. If this is the only way, then so be it." Andrew tried to keep his expression neutral. "I suspected you'd come to that conclusion," he admitted. "It's unorthodox, but it might work if we set it up carefully." David, turning away from the window, agreed. "Yes, but we need someone who won't draw suspicion, someone who can convincingly navigate your social circles. A polished actor or socialite might raise eyebrows. It needs to be someone off the radar, someone genuine enough that people believe in the relationship." Marcus recalled David's recent dining experiences. "You mentioned that small restaurant in Brooklyn. You said the waitress there had a certain straightforward charm." David nodded. "Rachel Cooper. She seems hardworking, honest. Customers can be demanding, and she handles them with a calm, sincere approach. I don't know her personally, but she's a possibility. She has that kind of authentic quality you can't easily fake." Marcus felt a jolt of interest and hesitation. He'd expected they'd pick someone from a modeling agency or an acquaintance needing financial help. Approaching a total stranger who might despise men in suits seemed daunting. But the notion of genuineness was compelling. After all, if she were entirely unfamiliar with high society, she might not be influenced by the politics of wealthy families. A few subway stops away, Rachel had just clocked in for her lunch shift. She wore a simple black apron and tried to steady her thoughts, still haunted by the new wave of debt notices. When Lisa passed her another envelope with final warnings, Rachel felt a spike of anxiety. "I can't believe they're charging interest on top of everything else," she muttered, scanning the bold letters. Lisa frowned sympathetically. Medical debts can be vicious. Are you going to see if you qualify for any payment plan? Rachel let out a weary sigh. I've tried. I might have to pick up a second job. There's no easy fix. Just then, David Brooks entered, scanning the dining area for a table. Spotting Rachel, he gave a polite smile and waited until she was free. She remembered him from the night before but didn't know his name. He looked more serious this time, as though he'd come on official business. When she approached, he introduced himself. Hello, Ms. Cooper, I'm David Brooks. I'd like to speak to you about a unique opportunity, if you have a moment. His direct manner caught her off guard. She guided him to a quieter corner by a large window. I'm not sure what this is about, Mr. Brooks, but I'm listening. He steepled his fingers, looking intently at her. I'm a financial advisor to Marcus Stone, CEO of Stone Enterprises. We have a proposition for you, one that might help with those bills I've seen you receive. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. I'm not looking for charity, if that's what you're offering. And if this is some kind of pyramid scheme... David gave a short laugh. I assure you, it's nothing like that. I won't beat around the bush. Mr. Stone needs to fulfill a marital requirement to secure his inheritance. He is looking for someone who would be willing to enter a temporary, mutually beneficial arrangement. Rachel stared at him, words failing to form. The proposal sounded surreal, like something out of a tabloid scandal. You're saying he wants to pay me to pretend to be his wife. I know it sounds strange, David admitted softly, but it would be a 6-month arrangement with a sizable financial compensation. It could clear any debts you have, and then some. For a moment, she was speechless. Memories of her father's humiliations at the hands of powerful corporations flooded her mind. Her father once told her that the Stone family was ruthless in business. Now here was a man from that very empire, offering a deal that seemed too good to be true. She managed to keep her composure. This feels wrong. Why me? Why not someone from his social circle? David's gaze softened. Marcus specifically wants someone genuine, outside his usual environment, someone who won't exploit the situation for personal gain or blackmail. From what I've observed, you're an honest person dealing with tough circumstances. Her cheeks flushed. She glanced around to make sure no one was overhearing their conversation. I can't just say yes on the spot. Of course not, David agreed. Take your time, but not too long. The deadline for his inheritance is approaching. If you're interested, let me know by tomorrow. As David left, Rachel remained seated, her heart pounding. Her rational side screamed that this was absurd and unethical. Yet a distant voice in her head whispered that this might be the lifeline she so desperately needed. She'd grown up resenting the Stone name, but now she had a chance to leverage their power for her own relief. Swallowing hard, Rachel glanced at the notices in her apron pocket. She had a choice to make, one that would shape the next phase of her life. Whatever she decided, there would be no going back. Rachel's modest studio apartment in Brooklyn was cluttered with overdue bills, old photo frames of her parents, and the constant hum of traffic outside the thin walls. She paced back and forth that evening, replaying David Brooks's words. If she took the offer, she could erase her crippling debts, but the idea of associating with a Stone, especially in a sham marriage, set her stomach on edge. She sank onto the worn-out couch, picking up a small wooden box from the coffee table. Inside were a few keepsakes, a faded photograph of her father, Robert Cooper, proudly standing beside a sign that read, Stone and Cooper, Inc., a partnership that dissolved under mysterious circumstances. Rachel remembered her father's quiet bitterness, how he never forgave the Stone family for what he called financial betrayal. He refused to go into detail, but the word stone always drew a haunted look in his eyes. "Dad," she whispered to the empty room, "would you want me to do this, or would you be horrified I'm making a deal with the devil?" Her voice cracked. The weight of her mother's medical debts, her father's memory, and her own pride pulled her in opposite directions. The next morning, Lisa dropped by unexpectedly, armed with coffee and a hopeful smile. "I figured you might need company," she said, handing Rachel a paper cup. "You seemed off yesterday after that man came by." Rachel explained the situation in hushed tones, mindful that the walls were thin. Lisa's eyes widened. "He wants you to marry Marcus Stone, pretend it's real, and you get $1 million. Rachel nodded, her pulse quickening just from saying it out loud. "It sounds insane, right?" Lisa hesitated, chewing her lip. "Well, it's definitely unorthodox, but Rach, you've been behind on rent for months, and these hospital bills aren't going anywhere. Maybe, just maybe, you could consider it. The money alone could change your life." Rachel stared at her friend, both appalled and strangely comforted by Lisa's practicality. "And if it's a total fiasco? What if the media finds out it's fake? Or what if Marcus Stone is a monster?" Lisa shrugged, though her eyes held concern. "It's a risk, but from what you've said, you'd have a contract. You'd be protected, financially at least." She placed a gentle hand on Rachel's arm. "Just promise me you'll be careful." Meanwhile, in Marcus's penthouse, the atmosphere was similarly tense. He paced his living room, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Andrew Wallace had dropped by to finalize details of the arrangement. "Any word from Ms. Cooper?" Andrew asked, scanning his phone for messages. Marcus exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Not yet." He tried to mask the flicker of anxiety. He was used to controlling every element of his life, negotiations, acquisitions, corporate decisions, but this felt different. This was personal, even if it was a business transaction. "Perhaps she's considering other options," Andrew remarked gently. "Or she's decided it's morally bankrupt," Marcus muttered. He walked over to a framed portrait of his grandfather, Arthur Stone, a stern figure with a classic suit and piercing eyes. Marcus felt his chest tighten with resentment. The old man's final wish had forced him into this corner, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was one last test of loyalty or character. Several hours later, David Brooks appeared at the restaurant in Brooklyn, hoping to catch Rachel at the end of her shift. She took him aside once the last customers left. "I've thought about your proposal," she began, voice trembling slightly. "It goes against everything I believe in. But I can't deny the help it would provide." David nodded, relief washing over his features. "I understand. We know how difficult this must be for you. Marcus is prepared to meet you in person to discuss terms, if you're willing." A pang of nerves shot through her. Meeting him made it all real. "Fine," she said after a long pause, "but I won't be pushed around. If this arrangement is going to happen, I have a few conditions of my own." David gave a small, almost respectful smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less." That night, as Rachel walked home under the flickering streetlights of Brooklyn, she felt torn between loyalty to her family's memory and the practical reality of her situation. The name Stone had been synonymous with her father's ruin, but this deal might be the only way to save herself from a similar fate. She clutched her coat tighter, bracing against the chilly wind, feeling an unsettling mixture of dread and strange anticipation. In her tiny apartment, she opened the wooden box again, running her fingers across the photo. "I'm not betraying you, Dad," she murmured. "I'm just doing what I have to do." Yet a lingering doubt whispered, if the Stones once wrecked her family, could she really trust them now, even if they offered a way out of her misery? Marcus found no solace that weekend. His mother, Victoria Stone, a regal woman in her late 60s, had insisted on dropping by for brunch. She rarely visited without a thinly veiled purpose. They sat in his dining room, a space dominated by an elegant marble table, with a panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline behind them. Sipping tea, Victoria set her cup down with deliberate care. "I hear you've been in discussions with Andrew. Something about the inheritance requirements," she ventured in a cool tone. Marcus stiffened, meeting her discerning gaze. "Yes, grandfather's stipulation. You're aware of it?" She nodded slowly. "Of course. It was his wish to ensure the Stone lineage remains intact and respectable. You realize the significance of choosing the right partner, don't you?" He forced a tight smile. "I'm well aware. But the arrangement I'm planning, it isn't about love. It's a necessary means to secure the company," Victoria sighed, her poised exterior revealing a hint of disappointment. "If you insist on turning this into a transaction, be prepared for the cost to your reputation. When the business world senses a scandal or a sham marriage, it can be brutal. I do hope you've at least found someone with a shred of decorum." Marcus had no answer to that. The truth was, he barely knew Rachel Cooper aside from David's account. If she agreed, he'd be taking a gamble on her ability to handle scrutiny from acquaintances, employees, and possibly the media. A few miles away, in a snug legal office that Thomas Green, an up-and-coming lawyer, rented in Midtown, Rachel sat with him, going over a quick consultation. She'd asked Lisa for a reference to ensure she had some legal advice before finalizing anything. Thomas was in his late 30s, with an earnest demeanor and a passion for justice. "I've never encountered such an arrangement personally," he admitted, scanning the bullet points she'd scribbled down. "But it's not illegal so long as both parties understand the contract and no fraud is intended beyond the personal arrangement. However, you should clarify any obligations, financial, social, or otherwise, before signing." Rachel bit her lip, tapping her foot anxiously on the floor. "I know it's bizarre, but the money, it could solve so many problems. And I'm desperate." Thomas studied her with kind eyes. "Desperation can cloud judgment, Rachel. Make sure you're comfortable with the terms, especially if you think there might be an emotional toll." She swallowed, recalling the photograph of her father and the Stone and Cooper sign. "Believe me, I have reservations. The Stone family, well, let's just say there's history. But maybe this is my chance to set some things right." Later that afternoon, Rachel arrived at a discreet cafe in the Upper East Side, where David had arranged a private meeting with Marcus. She wore her best outfit, a simple navy dress that clung modestly to her figure, and tried to steady her nerves. Marcus stood by a corner table, glancing at his watch. When he looked up, Rachel's first impression was his aura of command. He was tall, confident, with a businesslike nod of acknowledgement. She approached, feeling like every eye in the cafe was on her. He offered a polite but distant greeting. "Miss Cooper, thank you for agreeing to meet." She took a seat across from him, her posture stiff. "I'm here because I have questions, and because this idea of yours—" "David's idea," he corrected quickly, though a faint smirk suggested he'd considered it too. "But yes, I suppose it's mine to fulfill." She studied him, trying to reconcile the face of a handsome executive with the stories of corruption and greed she'd grown up hearing. "I'm not going to lie, I'm uneasy about this. And you should know my father once had dealings with Stone Enterprises. Things ended badly for him." Marcus visibly tensed, yet maintained composure. "I'm not aware of your father's case. Our company has had many partnerships over the decades. But I can assure you, my father, Henry Stone, handled matters differently than I would." Raising an eyebrow, Rachel pressed on. "So you're saying you're not like him?" He exhaled slowly. "I'm my own person. I've made mistakes, but I'm not in the business of repeating the past. That said, this arrangement is strictly about the future of Stone Enterprises. If you accept, we'll sign a contract for 6 months of marriage. You'll attend events, play the part of a devoted wife, and in return, you'll receive a considerable sum. He named the figure. Rachel's mouth went dry. It was even more than David had implied. A part of her felt the urge to stand up and walk away, outraged that one man's fortune could be casually tossed around like confetti. Another part of her, tired, financially desperate, heard a small voice whisper, "This will change your life." She cleared her throat. "All right. But I want transparency. No hidden clauses, no last-minute changes that compromise my dignity. I also need to maintain some independence. If I find out you or your company were responsible for what happened to my father, I'll be free to walk away without penalty." Marcus's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "Agreed, within reason. My legal team will draft it all. You'll have time to review with your own counsel, if you wish." They sat in tense silence for a moment, the weight of what they were about to do hanging in the air. Finally, Marcus extended his hand. "We have a deal, then." Rachel hesitated, staring at his outstretched palm. She thought of her father's photograph, her mother's medical debts, and the sense of betrayal she might feel if she discovered more about the Stone Empire's dark side. Yet the bills stacking up at home were all too real. Slowly, she took his hand. "We have a deal." The day after their meeting, Rachel walked through the wide lobby of Stone Enterprises for the first time. The building towered above the bustling Manhattan street, its modern architecture shimmering in steel and glass. She had agreed to come in for a preliminary contract signing. Her heart raced as she approached the reception desk, where a friendly staff member directed her to the 42nd floor. Riding the elevator, she stared at her reflection in the polished doors. Her mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Part of her felt as though she were betraying her father's memory by working with the very people he blamed for his downfall. Yet she couldn't deny that this arrangement might be her only escape from a life weighed down by perpetual debt. Upon stepping off the elevator, she was greeted by Beverly Sanders, a refined woman in her 50s with short, stylish grey hair and a warm, polite smile. "Ms. Cooper, welcome. Mr. Stone is expecting you. I'm Beverly, his executive assistant." Rachel offered a small smile back. "Nice to meet you, Beverly. Thank you for showing me in." As they walked through a corridor lined with modern art and sleek furniture, Beverly glanced sideways at Rachel. "I've been with the Stone family for many years," she said gently. "Marcus is not the man his father was, and despite what you may have heard about this arrangement, he's kinder than he appears. I hope you'll give him the benefit of the doubt." Rachel appreciated the sincerity in Beverly's voice. "I'll try," she replied simply. In Marcus's expansive office, Andrew Wallace sat at a large conference table with a neat stack of papers. Marcus, dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized his confident bearing, stood up when she entered. "Rachel, thank you for coming," he said, motioning her to sit. She took a seat, scanning the piles of documents that presumably detailed the terms of their marriage contract. "That's quite a lot of paper," she commented, feeling her nerves flutter. Andrew smiled politely. "Standard for such arrangements? We've outlined the length of the contract, financial specifics, confidentiality clauses, everything to protect both parties." Marcus folded his arms, leaning against the table. "I want you to be comfortable with every point. Look it over carefully. If there's anything you disagree with, we can negotiate." "Within reason," Andrew added, a hint of caution in his voice. Rachel spent the next half-hour reading key sections of the draft. The agreement stated she would live with Marcus in his penthouse, accompany him to social and corporate events, and conduct herself as a supportive spouse. In exchange, at the conclusion of 6 months, provided she didn't breach the agreement, she would receive $1 million. There were no obligations for physical intimacy stated, though it was implied they might need to show public affection on occasion. Swallowing her nerves, Rachel glanced up. So, this is it. Once I sign, my life changes overnight. Marcus's gaze was steady. Yes, and if you have any reservations, better voice them now. Taking a deep breath, Rachel thought about her father's photograph, her mother's final days of struggle, and the mountain of bills in her kitchen. She also thought of the chance to uncover whatever truth lay buried in the Stone family's past. "I'm ready," she said, exhaling slowly. "I want to add a clause that if we discover any serious misconduct that affects me directly, something that violates my moral principles, I can terminate the agreement. No penalty." Andrew and Marcus exchanged a quick look. Marcus nodded. "That seems fair. Andrew, note that." Andrew jotted a few lines, then passed the pages to Rachel for her signature. The room felt unnaturally quiet as she scribbled her name in bold ink. She could almost hear her father's voice in her head, warning her about the Stones, cautioning her that their world was built on deception. But in that moment, she forced herself to believe that she was forging her own path. With the final signature, Marcus released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you," he murmured. "I know this can't be easy for you." Beverly returned, offering Rachel a grateful smile. "I'll be helping you adjust, making sure you have everything you need." She handed Rachel a small binder filled with schedules, upcoming events, and notes on dress codes. Standing from her chair, Rachel closed the binder. "So I guess we're married on paper, if not yet in spirit." Her tone was wry, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her apprehension. Marcus gave a measured nod. "The official ceremony, albeit small, will be next week for legal documentation. We'll file for the marriage license immediately and handle the rest quietly." As she stepped back into the elevator afterward, Rachel felt a surge of conflicting emotions. This was the biggest leap she had ever taken, one that could either save her from financial ruin or entangle her in a web of corporate secrets. The doors slid shut, and she caught one last glimpse of the 42nd floor lobby, realizing she was about to become part of a world she had only witnessed from the outside. Outside, Manhattan's midday rush enveloped her. Cars honked, pedestrians hurried by, and towering buildings cast long shadows across the sidewalks. Rachel gripped the binder, bracing herself for the next phase. She was stepping into the unknown, and there was no telling what price she might pay for this strange new beginning. Rachel stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor of Stone Enterprises, bracing herself for another day of whirlwind arrangements. Though the ink on her marriage contract with Marcus was barely dry, she already sensed her life shifting at breakneck speed. Everything, from the clothes she wore to the people she needed to impress, had changed. Gone was her comforting apron at the Brooklyn restaurant. In its place, a modest but professional skirt suit that Beverly Sanders had helped her pick out. Beverly, poised and efficient, appeared in the hallway with a stack of folders in her arms. "Good morning, Mrs. Stone," she greeted with a practiced smile, her eyes sparkling with warmth. Rachel still hadn't grown accustomed to the new title. "Just Rachel, please," she replied, voice carrying a slight edge of nerves. "I'm not used to all of this." Beverly gave a sympathetic nod, then gestured for Rachel to follow her into a smaller conference room. The space was decorated with soft, neutral hues, unlike the main office's cool, modern lines. "This is our staging area today," Beverly explained, placing the folders on the round table. "I'll be guiding you through the Stone family's social circles and corporate obligations." Think of me as your personal mentor in all things related to Marcus's world. Rachel settled into a chair, looking at Beverly's kindly face. Thank you. You've been so patient. I know I'm a complete fish out of water here. With a gentle laugh, Beverly handed her a typed schedule. My job is to make sure you're ready for whatever comes your way. Now, let's go over the basics. Dinners, galas, stockholder meetings. You'll be expected to attend them as Marcus's wife. And we'll fine-tune some etiquette so you'll feel less awkward around, let's say, certain personalities in his social set. Rachel scanned the paper, her stomach twisting at the sheer volume of formal events. He really has to do all this in a week. Marcus is Stone Enterprises' face, Beverly replied, her tone matter-of-fact. Lately, there's been extra pressure from some board members, particularly a man named Edgar Coleman. They're looking for any reason to doubt Marcus's stability, so your seamless integration is crucial. Rachel heard the gravity beneath Beverly's calm words. I understand. I don't want to mess this up. Beverly placed a comforting hand on hers. Think of it not as faking, but as adapting. Show people that you're here in good faith. The rest will flow naturally if you stay authentic. A gentle knock interrupted them. Marcus stepped into the room, his presence filling the space. Hope I'm not intruding, he said, scanning Rachel's face for signs of tension. Beverly shook her head. Perfect timing. I was just about to go over the upcoming charity banquet. She looked at Rachel. It's this Thursday at the Metropolitan Grand Hotel. You'll need an evening gown. I'll arrange for a stylist if you like. Rachel cleared her throat. I've never been to a charity banquet. What should I expect? Marcus offered a half smile. A lot of formalities, speeches, silent auctions, endless handshakes, but it'll be manageable. He turned to Beverly. I appreciate you taking the lead. This is new territory for both of us. Beverly excused herself, leaving the two alone. Rachel twisted the schedule in her hands, searching for the right words. I'm grateful you have someone like Beverly to guide me. I'd be floundering otherwise. Marcus leaned against the table, crossing his arms. She's been with the company for years. I trust her judgment. A pause. Is there anything bothering you about these events? She took a moment, inhaling before she answered. Honestly, I'm worried I'll make a fool of myself. I have no experience mingling with elite donors or cutthroat investors. His expression softened, something akin to reassurance in his eyes. You've managed to impress people in more difficult environments. Remember, you used to handle unruly customers at the restaurant. This isn't so different, except these folks wear expensive suits. That earned him a small smile. Right, just more zeros in their bank accounts. He nodded, acknowledging her point. For a moment, the tension lifted, and they simply stood there, aware that their partnership was a balancing act between personal boundaries and public appearances. As Rachel gathered her belongings, Marcus cleared his throat. Rachel, if there's anything you need, anything that'll make you feel more at ease, let me know. This is about fulfilling the inheritance clause, yes, but we both have to find a way to live with it. She studied him, trying to see beyond the polished businessman. I will, she said softly. Thank you. They left the conference room together, walking down the corridor where staff members offered polite smiles. For the first time, Rachel sensed a subtle shift. She wasn't just Rachel Cooper, the waitress from Brooklyn. In the eyes of these people, she was Mrs. Stone, walking side by side with the company's CEO, yet in her heart she remained cautious. The Stone name still carried the weight of her father's past misfortunes. Beverly might be her mentor, but Rachel knew she would also need her own inner compass to navigate the complexities ahead. After all, she had a purpose here beyond simply playing a role. She was determined to find out how her family had once been entangled in Stone Enterprises' history. And perhaps, In doing so, she might finally lay old ghosts to rest. The first step toward her new life came sooner than Rachel anticipated. Marcus insisted she pack her essentials and move into his penthouse by the end of the week. He cited practicality. After all, a married couple would be expected to live together. So, on a chilly Wednesday morning, she found herself standing in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, boxes scattered around the cramped living room. Lisa, her longtime friend and co-worker, handed her a roll of packing tape. "I still can't believe this is happening," she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and worry. "I mean, just last month you were worried about paying rent, and now you're marrying a millionaire." Rachel offered a half-hearted laugh. "I know. Feels like I'm stepping into someone else's story." She gently placed a photo of her parents into bubble wrap, trying not to dwell too long on the memories it stirred. "So, are you quitting at the restaurant officially?" Lisa asked, placing a few books into an open box. Rachel hesitated before nodding. "I don't see how I can keep waitressing and juggle these social events. Marcus said he'd compensate me for any lost wages. But leaving the restaurant feels, well, final." Lisa paused, resting a comforting hand on Rachel's shoulder. "You can always come back if things don't work out, you know. The door's open." Tears pricked the corners of Rachel's eyes. She cleared her throat and forced a smile. "Thanks, I appreciate it. I just hope I'm not making a huge mistake." By late afternoon, the boxes were taped shut and labeled. A sleek, black SUV arrived, courtesy of Marcus, to transport her belongings. Rachel stood in the doorway, taking one last, lingering look at the only home she could afford on her own, until now. Memories of struggling with late-night shifts and worrying about overdue bills pulsed through her mind. This apartment, as humble as it was, represented her independence. Leaving it felt like stepping off a cliff without a safety net. The driver helped Lisa load the boxes, while Rachel carried a small duffel bag containing her most treasured items: a few framed photographs, a wooden box of keepsakes, and a journal she had kept since her teenage years. Her heart pounded as she slid into the back seat of the SUV, Lisa standing on the curb, waving goodbye. Their eyes met through the tinted window, and Rachel mouthed, "Thank you." Lisa waved back with an encouraging smile. Then the vehicle pulled away, leaving her old life behind. An hour later, Rachel arrived at Marcus's penthouse on the Upper East Side. The building soared high into the sky, each window reflecting the glimmer of city lights. As she entered the marble-floored lobby, the doorman greeted her with a friendly nod. "Good evening, Mrs. Stone." Rachel still cringed at the title, but forced a gracious nod in return. The elevator ride felt interminable, a steady ascent into a world she barely recognized. When the doors finally slid open, Marcus stood waiting at the threshold of a vast, open living room bathed in soft golden light. "Welcome," he said simply, stepping forward to help her with the duffel bag. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a breathtaking view of the city skyline, the streets below sparkling like constellations. She looked around, noting the minimalist decor, expensive leather sofas, abstract art on the walls, and a gleaming grand piano in one corner. "It's beautiful," she managed, though her voice trembled with unease. "I've had Beverly set up a room for your belongings," he explained, gesturing down a hall. "You can decorate it however you like. It's your space as much as mine now." Grateful for the privacy, Rachel followed him. The guest bedroom, her bedroom, she realized, was equally luxurious, with plush carpeting and large windows. Yet the emptiness of the space, devoid of personal touches, made it feel like a hotel suite. She set her duffel bag on the bed, her fingers tracing the edge of a picture frame she'd placed inside. Marcus lingered by the doorway, clearing his throat. "I know this is a big change. If you need anything, just say so." Rachel swallowed hard. "I appreciate that." He gave her a brief, understanding nod before retreating. Once alone, Rachel took a moment to steady her breathing. She walked over to the window, staring at the city lights twinkling far below, the Brooklyn skyline just visible in the distance. It hit her that she was truly leaving that part of her life behind, a part defined by struggle but also by her own sense of control. Now, she was stepping into an alliance with Marcus Stone. She wondered if this place would ever feel like a real home to her, or would it forever remain a gilded cage, reminding her of the compromise she'd made. For now, she forced herself to think practically. She would unpack, settle in, and learn to navigate the demands of this privileged new world. As she glanced once more at her reflection in the window, she silently promised herself, "I'll remember who I am. No matter how fancy this place is, I won't lose myself here." 2 days later, Rachel stood in front of a gilt-framed mirror in a private dressing suite at an upscale boutique. Beverly fussed with the straps of a midnight blue evening gown that Rachel was trying on for the upcoming charity banquet. "Just a little adjustment here," Beverly murmured, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "How does it feel?" Rachel turned, the gown's silky fabric catching the light. It was elegant, flattering her figure in ways she wasn't used to. The hem grazed the floor, and the sweetheart neckline added a touch of sophistication without being overly revealing. "It's lovely," she admitted, though a note of apprehension crept into her voice. "I've never worn anything this expensive. I'm afraid of spilling something on it." Beverly laughed softly, handing her a pair of matching heels. "Don't worry, I'll keep an eye out for any rogue drinks." "You'll do great." Just then, Marcus appeared in the doorway, careful not to intrude too much. He paused, observing Rachel in the mirror. "That color suits you," he remarked, his gaze appraising but not unkind. She blushed, more from the unfamiliar situation than the compliment. "Thank you, I just hope I don't trip and make a scene." He shrugged, offering a faint smile. "If you do, at least it'll be memorable." Beverly gave them both a knowing look. "All right, you two, you'll be heading to the hotel together. Remember, the press may be there. This is your first official public appearance as a married couple." Rachel's stomach churned. The ceremony at City Hall had been quiet, almost secret. They'd married in front of a curt official with only David Brooks and Beverly as witnesses. Afterward, there'd been no time for celebration, just paperwork and the hush of mutual uncertainty. Now they were about to reveal their marriage to the world. That evening, Marcus and Rachel arrived at the Metropolitan Grand Hotel in a sleek black limousine. Lights flashed as photographers snapped pictures of arriving guests, mostly business magnates, celebrities, and philanthropic figures. The doorman opened the car door, and Marcus stepped out, extending a hand to Rachel. She took it, heart pounding, and emerged in the midnight blue gown. The cameras immediately shifted their focus. Voices clamored for Marcus's attention. "Mr. Stone, who's your beautiful companion?" "Is this your wife? When did you get married?" Marcus, unflappable as ever, gave a gracious nod. "This is Rachel Stone," he said, guiding her through the press line. "We were recently married. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're here to support tonight's charitable cause." The reporters persisted, but hotel security shepherded them inside. Rachel could breathe again, although her pulse raced. She glanced at Marcus in gratitude. He responded with a small tilt of his head, acknowledging that first public test had gone smoothly. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed columns. Tables draped in white linen surrounded a central stage where a string quartet played softly. Guests in refined attire mingled over champagne, discussing business deals and philanthropic efforts. Rachel felt a wave of self-consciousness. She wasn't used to mingling in these circles. Marcus pressed a hand gently to her back. "Stay close," he said, his voice low but reassuring. "I'll introduce you to some key figures, and then you can mingle at your comfort." They navigated the clusters of people. Many recognized Marcus instantly, offering congratulations on his sudden marriage. Some wore polite smiles, others displayed thinly veiled curiosity, trying to figure out who Rachel was and why they had never heard of her before. An older couple approached, the man extending his hand. "Marcus, good to see you." He cast a sharp glance at Rachel, though his smile remained cordial. "I'm Edgar Coleman, and this is my wife, Marianne." Rachel's mind flashed back to Beverly's caution about a man named Edgar Coleman. He was a rival investor, known for challenging Marcus's decisions at board meetings. She forced a warm smile. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Coleman, Mrs. Coleman." Edgar's gaze lingered on Rachel's face. "So you're the mystery Mrs. Stone." We'd begun to think Marcus might remain a bachelor for life. His tone had an undercurrent of skepticism, but he maintained a superficial politeness. Marcus stepped in smoothly. "Life changes us in unexpected ways, Edgar. Surely you, of all people, understand the importance of personal growth." That elicited a thin laugh from Edgar. "Well, we'll certainly look forward to getting to know your wife better." Turning to Rachel, he added, "I do hope you'll join us for dinner sometime. We can discuss Stone Enterprises." Rachel bristled at his pointed mention of the company, suspecting an ulterior motive. Still, she managed a polite nod, recalling Beverly's advice to remain composed. "I'd like that," she answered evenly, though in truth, the prospect of dining with the Colemans made her uneasy. The couple moved on, leaving Rachel feeling as if she'd narrowly avoided a snare. Marcus leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "He's testing the waters, trying to see if we're genuine. Don't let him intimidate you." She set her shoulders resolutely. "I won't." Yet as the night progressed, Rachel couldn't shake the sense that she was walking a tightrope. Every conversation, every toast, every lingering glance felt like a test of her authenticity. The truth remained. She was here under false pretenses. She was no high society spouse. She was Rachel Cooper, raised by a father who once cursed the Stone name. Still, she reminded herself of her contract, her debts, and her growing determination to uncover what had really happened to her family years ago. Perhaps, in the process, she might find something else, something more honest, beneath the polished surface of Marcus Stone and his complicated world. In the days following the charity banquet, Rachel felt like a newcomer in a strange land. She learned that high society had its own set of unwritten rules. Appearances mattered. Reputation was currency, and she had a lot to learn if she wanted to keep up the facade of being the perfect wife for Marcus Stone. Beverly proved invaluable. She spent hours each morning briefing Rachel on corporate affairs, social engagements, and even the personal quirks of certain board members. If you remember that Mr. Abernathy hates being called Larry, and that Mrs. Gleason loathes talk of politics at dinner, you'll avoid half the drama. Beverly joked one morning, handing Rachel a binder brimming with notes. Rachel flipped through the pages, dizzy from the sheer volume of information. "It's like studying for a final exam every day." Beverly laughed. "You'll get the hang of it. Meanwhile, focus on building genuine connections. People can sense when you're forcing conversation." One afternoon, Marcus asked her to join him in his home office to discuss an upcoming shareholder event. Spread out on his desk were charts of quarterly profits, legal briefs, and a seating chart for a formal dinner. She noticed he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, hair slightly disheveled. "Rough day?" she ventured, settling into a chair. He rubbed his temples. "Every day's rough." Edgar Coleman stirring trouble among the board, questioning my ability to manage the firm after this sudden marriage. Rachel felt a pang of guilt. Maybe if I were more convincing. He waved her off. It's not your fault. Edgar would criticize me for breathing if he could. He's always had his eyes on a bigger slice of the company. She wanted to help but wasn't sure how. Can you, I don't know, reassure the board that I'm not some gold digger who'll vanish in 6 months? Marcus offered a wry smile. That's exactly what Edgar wants them to think. He's spreading rumors that you came out of nowhere for the money. I've denied it, but he's persistent. Rachel fidgeted with her hands. I get why they're suspicious. My life did change overnight. He nodded slowly, scanning her face. Sometimes I wonder if putting you through this was fair. But neither of us had many choices. She looked down, recalling the debt notices piled in her old apartment. No, we didn't. A moment of silence passed between them, heavier than usual. For all their differences, they were in this together, bound by a contract that felt more significant with each passing day. Eventually, Marcus cleared his throat and slid a folder toward her. Here's the list of attendees for the shareholder dinner next week. I need you to stand by me, greet everyone politely, and show them you're genuinely invested in Stone Enterprises' future. It might help dispel some doubts. She scanned the names, noting Edgar Coleman's among them. All right, she said, determination creeping into her voice. I'll do my best. That evening, Rachel retreated to her designated bedroom, longing for a moment of peace. The penthouse was quiet, illuminated by the city lights outside. She retrieved her father's old photo from the top drawer, one where he stood by a sign that read Stone and Cooper, Inc. In his eyes, she saw pride and a glimmer of hope. She wondered how it had all gone so wrong. She whispered into the stillness, Dad, I'm here now, inside the Stone Empire. Maybe I can find answers. A tap at her door startled her. She quickly tucked the photo away. Come in. Beverly stepped inside, wearing a gentle smile. I just wanted to say good night. Also, tomorrow we're going to lunch with Charlotte Hart, one of our philanthropic partners. She's been curious about you. Rachel appreciated the advanced notice. Thank you. Charlotte Hart. I've seen her name in those binders. She works on social initiatives, right? Yes. She's a board member at several charities funded by Stone Enterprises. Also a close confidant of Marcus's father, though I suspect she had her own reservations about Henry Stone's methods. She might become a friend if you let her. Rachel nodded, intrigued. I'd like that. I don't have many friends here. As Beverly wished her good night and closed the door, Rachel exhaled. Despite the glitzy surroundings and the constant swirl of demands, she felt a flicker of relief at the thought of meeting someone who might have deeper insights into the company's history. If Charlotte had known Henry Stone personally, maybe she could shed light on how Robert Cooper got caught in the Stone family's undertow all those years ago. For now, though, Rachel settled into bed, the city lights flickering across the walls. Day by day, she was immersing herself in this new world, adapting to its rules, forging new connections, and with each event, each handshake, she sensed her doubts battling her determination. She was no longer just Rachel Cooper, Brooklyn waitress. She was Rachel Stone, wife of Marcus Stone, with a role to play and secrets to uncover. The next afternoon, Rachel and Beverly walked into a sunlit cafe near Central Park. It had a cozy yet upscale charm, with soft jazz playing in the background and fresh flowers adorning each table. Waiting for them at a corner booth was Charlotte Hart, a striking woman in her mid-40s with a confident posture and a welcoming smile. Rachel, it's wonderful to finally meet you, Charlotte said, extending her hand. She wore a crisp white blouse paired with tailored trousers, exuding both elegance and approachability. Rachel accepted the handshake, sensing an immediate warmth from Charlotte. Thank you for inviting me. Beverly gestured for them to sit. I'll order us some tea. You two talk. She moved gracefully to the counter, leaving Rachel and Charlotte in a comfortable silence for a brief moment. You've caused quite the stir in our circles, Charlotte remarked, folding her hands on the table. People can't stop talking about Marcus's sudden marriage. Rachel tensed, wondering if Charlotte was another skeptic. I'm sure they're saying all sorts of things. It's been an adjustment. Charlotte tilted her head thoughtfully. I don't indulge in gossip. I prefer to draw my own conclusions, and what I see is a woman who's doing her best in a situation that would overwhelm most of us. Relief surged through Rachel. That's kind of you to say, Beverly returned with a pot of tea, pouring each of them a cup. So, Charlotte, how is your work with the Heart Foundation going? Charlotte's eyes lit up with genuine passion. We're expanding our scholarship program for women re-entering the workforce. Marcus has been supportive, though we're still finalizing the budget. Rachel sipped her tea, intrigued. I used to see a lot of people struggling at the restaurant where I worked. Single mothers, students juggling jobs. It always made me wish there were more resources for them. Charlotte leaned forward, interest piqued. You see, that's the kind of perspective we need more of. Sometimes, the corporate world is disconnected from everyday realities. I appreciate your honesty, Rachel. Beverly glanced at Rachel, proud that she was making a good impression. Rachel felt a hint of confidence blossom. Maybe she could carve out a space here that aligned with her values. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on topics from philanthropy to simple life experiences. Charlotte shared anecdotes about her own humble beginnings. She'd grown up in a small town, working her way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. She understood struggle. I see a lot of myself in you, Charlotte commented, smiling at Rachel. That genuine spark, that desire to see the human side of things. Rachel's cheeks warmed. It's just how I was raised, I guess. I don't like pretense. They spent over an hour chatting, the sunlight shifting as the afternoon wore on. Eventually, Charlotte checked her watch. I have a meeting soon, but I'd love for us to continue this conversation. Maybe you and Marcus could attend a charity luncheon I'm hosting next month. Rachel nodded, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. I'd be honored. Thank you. Once Charlotte left, Beverly squeezed Rachel's hand in delight. You impressed her, I could tell. She's very influential in the philanthropic sphere. Having her support will help you gain acceptance. Rachel breathed out a small laugh. To be honest, I'm just glad to meet someone real. She seems sincere. Beverly led Rachel out of the cafe, stepping onto the busy sidewalk. The city's energy hummed around them. That's the key. Find the people who matter, people with heart. This world can be cold, but it's not without warmth. They walked back toward the penthouse, the afternoon sun casting elongated shadows across the bustling streets. Rachel felt lighter, more hopeful. Meeting Charlotte had shown her that not everyone in Marcus's sphere was a scheming opportunist. As they reached the building, Rachel spotted Thomas Green, the earnest lawyer who'd briefly advised her, exiting a taxi. He looked surprised to see her. Rachel, hi, I was just about to call you. She waved him over. Thomas, everything okay? He hesitated, glancing at Beverly, then lowered his voice. I've been looking into old business records you asked about. Something about your father's involvement with Stone Enterprises. I found references to an early partnership, though the documents are partially redacted. Could we meet privately to discuss this? Rachel's heart clenched. She hadn't forgotten her private mission, though her new life had kept her busy. Yes, absolutely, soon. Beverly arched an eyebrow curiously, but Thomas offered a polite nod and excused himself. Once he was gone, Beverly asked gently, Is there something going on with your family and Stone Enterprises? Rachel swallowed hard, recalling her father's old photograph. Possibly. It's an old matter, but I'd like closure. She forced a reassuring smile. Don't worry, it won't interfere with my role here. Beverly looked unconvinced but said nothing further, merely pressing the elevator button. As they ascended, Rachel felt the city rush by beneath them, and with it, a swirl of possibility and trepidation. She was finding allies in unexpected places, forging connections she never imagined. Yet she also sensed she was only beginning to scratch the surface of a much deeper story, one that involved her father, the Stone Empire, and secrets that might shake her newfound stability. A few evenings later, Stone Enterprises hosted a private cocktail reception in its own skyscraper's penthouse conference hall. The event was meant to be small and exclusive, just board members, high-level executives, and select family friends. Despite its intimate nature, the stakes felt higher than ever for Rachel. Dressed in a tailored black cocktail dress, she circulated among the guests, standing dutifully by Marcus's side whenever he introduced her to someone important. The city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows shimmered like a backdrop of possibility and peril. Halfway through the evening, as Rachel grabbed a glass of sparkling water, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found Edgar Coleman, wearing a thin-lipped smile. "Mrs. Stone," he greeted, voice smooth as silk. "You're doing quite well tonight. Everyone seems charmed by you." She took a careful step back, maintaining a polite but guarded stance. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman. I'm still getting used to this environment." He sipped his drink, eyes never leaving her. "Such a big change, isn't it? Going from a humble life to, well, all of this." Rachel tried to keep her composure. "Yes, it's different, but I'm learning." Edgar chuckled, as if amused. "I do admire adaptability, and you must know that this marriage raised eyebrows. People wonder about your background, your motives." Rachel's heart thudded. This was no casual conversation. He was fishing for weaknesses. "My motives? I'm simply supporting my husband." He leaned closer, voice low. "Are you, really, or do you see an opportunity to better your station?" She caught a whiff of cologne and arrogance. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but I'm exactly who I say I am," she responded, trying to sound confident. Before Edgar could retort, Marcus appeared at Rachel's side. His eyes flicked between them, quickly assessing the tension. "Edgar," Marcus said curtly, "everything all right here?" Edgar offered a disarming smile. "Just getting acquainted with your wife, Marcus. She's quite delightful." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Well, we appreciate your interest, but I believe Mrs. Stone and I should mingle with the others, if you'll excuse us." Placing a firm hand on Rachel's arm, he guided her away. The moment they were out of earshot, Rachel blew out a breath. "He's relentless," Marcus gave a short nod. "He's trying to rattle us, see if there's any crack in our story. Don't let him bully you." She frowned, glimpsing Edgar chatting animatedly with another board member. "I can handle him. I've dealt with worse at the restaurant," she quipped, attempting humor to ease her nerves. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "I know you can." Then his expression sobered. "Just be cautious. He'll exploit any slip-up." They continued mingling. Rachel met a few friendlier faces, including a kindly older woman who raved about the new scholarship program Charlotte was sponsoring. Still, a part of her mind kept drifting back to Edgar's probing questions. Shortly after, Charlotte herself arrived, greeting Rachel with a warm hug. "How are you holding up?" she asked, noticing the tension in Rachel's shoulders. "Better now that you're here," Rachel admitted, drawing relief from Charlotte's easy demeanor. They talked about the scholarship fund, about the progress Charlotte was making in partnership with Stone Enterprises. But eventually, the conversation shifted to Henry Stone and the early days of the company, territory Rachel had been itching to explore. Henry was brilliant but Single-minded, Charlotte said carefully. He believed in expanding aggressively, and not everyone agreed with his methods. Rachel's pulse quickened. Did he ever have smaller partnerships with people who later felt squeezed out? Charlotte frowned, seeming to choose her words. Yes, that happened. There were lawsuits and settlements. It was the nature of big business back then. Why do you ask? Rachel forced a light shrug. Just curious. I've heard rumors. She didn't want to divulge too much, not yet. Charlotte studied her, concern flickering in her eyes, but she didn't press the issue. Well, if you hear more specifics, I might be able to fill in the blanks. Don't hesitate to ask. Feeling gratitude and unease all at once, Rachel thanked her. She caught Marcus watching them from across the room, a question in his gaze. She offered him a reassuring smile, but her mind was roiling. As the evening wound down, board members filtered out, and staff began cleaning the venue. Marcus and Rachel lingered in a quiet corner, sipping the last of their drinks. "You did well tonight," he said softly, leaning against the window. Despite Edgar's meddling, people seemed genuinely impressed. Rachel let out a weary laugh. "I'm exhausted from smiling and making small talk." She leaned her forehead against the glass, the city lights shimmering below. "But I survived." He watched her, something gentle crossing his face. "You're handling more pressure than most people ever face. I can't ignore that." Turning to him, she found her tone unexpectedly earnest. "I'm just glad I'm not alone here. You know, ironically, that's the only thing that keeps me going sometimes, that we're in this together." Surprise flickered in his eyes, and for a moment he seemed about to say something meaningful. But the moment passed, and he pressed his lips into a thin line, nodding instead. "We should head home." They left the penthouse conference hall, passing a quiet hallway where the last of the guests trickled out. Behind them, the city stretched on, infinite and full of secrets. Edgar Coleman's prying, Charlotte's cryptic hints about Henry Stone, and Rachel's own determination to discover the truth, all hung in the air like an unspoken promise of future confrontations. This was only the first real clash, Rachel realized. More would come, yet with each challenge, she felt her resolve crystallizing. She hadn't come this far to be intimidated or misled. She was in the heart of Stone Enterprises now, and she intended to shine a light on every hidden corner, even if it meant unraveling more than she bargained for. A light drizzle fell outside the penthouse windows, veiling Manhattan in a gray shimmer. In the living room, Rachel sat cross-legged on the sofa, reading through a printed spreadsheet that Thomas Green had discreetly sent her. These were records referencing the early years of Stone Enterprises, contracts, legal filings, and cryptic notes about private settlements. She'd skimmed similar material before, but here, highlighted in yellow, were mentions of her father, Robert Cooper. She felt her pulse quicken as she read. Cooper's departure from partnership. Undisclosed financial arrangement. The language was frustratingly vague. She set the papers aside, pushing her hair back in frustration. Marcus, having just ended a phone call, stepped into the room. He noticed the scattered sheets on the coffee table, recognizing Stone Enterprises' letterhead. "Another dive into the archives?" he asked quietly, loosening his tie. Rachel nodded, swallowing her anxiety. "I can't help it. Every time I find something, it just leads to more questions. There's no clear record of how my father was forced out, only vague references to an incident." Marcus approached, his brow furrowing with genuine concern. "If it helps, I've asked Beverly to scan some older files in our private storage. I'll let you know if we turn up anything more detailed." She gave him a grateful look, noticing how he was making an effort to help. It was a subtle but meaningful shift from the rigid contract-based partnership they started with. "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate that." Before either could say more, Beverly entered, carrying a tablet. "There's an emergency board meeting in an hour. Edgar Coleman called it." Something about new allegations regarding Stone Enterprises' ethics compliance. She cast Marcus a worried glance. He's stirring up trouble again, sir. Marcus exhaled, tension lining his face. Rachel, I might need you there. As my wife, your presence could demonstrate unity and calm. Are you up for it? Rachel stood, sliding the papers into a folder. Absolutely. Let's show him we're not rattled. An hour later, they walked into the sleek, glass-walled boardroom, where the entire Stone Enterprises board was gathered around a polished table. Edgar Coleman, ever the picture of smug composure, stood at the head, addressing the group. Heads turned when Marcus and Rachel entered, the hush thick with anticipation. Edgar placed a hand dramatically on a stack of documents. Ladies and gentlemen, I've recently become aware of certain questionable practices in one of our subsidiaries. It appears some older contracts might not meet our modern compliance standards. As shareholders, we must investigate any wrongdoing. Rachel's stomach knotted. She spotted Andrew Wallace, the company lawyer, looking tense. Marcus stepped forward, taking the floor. We won't tolerate unethical dealings, he said in a clear voice. If there are issues, we'll address them, but let's be cautious about accusing people or the company's history without facts. Edgar made a show of flipping through his papers. Indeed, we must rely on facts. I only hope Stone Enterprises won't resist full transparency. A murmur went through the room. Rachel caught snippets of conversation, words like scandal, audit, and legacy. She hated how everything felt directed at Marcus, as though he alone bore responsibility for decades of company operations. Nevertheless, Marcus maintained a composed front. With unwavering confidence, he agreed to an internal audit of the subsidiary in question. We have nothing to hide, he stated firmly. My grandfather and father may have had their methods, but we're committed to rectifying any past oversights. Rachel watched as some board members exchanged looks of cautious relief. Edgar, however, appeared almost disappointed that Marcus wasn't fighting back more aggressively. After the meeting adjourned, the two men faced each other, tension crackling in the air. You seem quite sure of your moral high ground, Marcus, Edgar said, voice silky. I wonder if your wife shares your certainty. His gaze slid over Rachel, lingering like a challenge. Rachel lifted her chin. I do, Mr. Coleman. We stand by our commitment to running this company ethically. He offered a shallow smile. Time will tell. Then he swept out of the room, leaving a swirl of uneasy energy behind. Andrew pulled Marcus aside while Rachel stepped back, letting them confer. She noticed a couple of board members shoot her polite smiles, while others eyed her warily. Yet she stood her ground, keeping her posture confident. Marcus ended his quiet exchange with Andrew and rejoined her. We'll have to start the audit immediately. It'll be more scrutiny, more questions. Rachel nodded. Are you worried about what they'll find? He shrugged, a hint of resignation in his eyes. Not particularly, but you never know. My father, he wasn't always transparent. This might dredge up old disputes, including your father's. The mention of her father's name brought a fresh pang of concern. Still, Rachel squeezed his arm gently, an unspoken show of solidarity. We'll handle it. Together. Her mind reeled at the realization she was not only part of a contract marriage, but now fully entangled in the Stone Enterprises' web of corporate intrigue. Every step she took, every shred of information she uncovered, felt like a test. Yet in the wake of Edgar's aggression and the board's watchful eyes, Rachel sensed a new resolve crystallizing inside her. This was more than a marriage of convenience. It was a chance to confront the very system that might have wronged her father. And whether Marcus realized it or not, she intended to do just that, even if the process led them through a minefield of hidden secrets and moral quandaries. She caught Marcus's gaze and gave a firm nod. For all the tension swirling around them, She recognized a subtle victory in how they'd presented a united front, yet she knew that small triumphs now would lead to far greater challenges ahead. The following day, Rachel paced in the penthouse's expansive living room, waiting for a phone call from Thomas Green. He'd promised to share any new leads he discovered about her father's dealings with Stone Enterprises. Meanwhile, a string of anxious thoughts swirled in her head about the board meeting, Edgar Coleman's pointed remarks, and the growing complications of her sham marriage. She paused by the wall of windows, gazing at the city below. It was midday, and the sunlight glanced off skyscrapers, making them gleam like polished silver. How had her life changed so drastically? Just weeks ago, she'd been worried about tips from waiting tables. Now, she was married to Marcus Stone, living in a world of corporate high stakes. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. Marcus entered, wearing a casual sweater instead of his usual suit. His hair looked slightly tousled, and his expression was softer, almost vulnerable. "Hey," he said, stopping a few feet away, hands in his pockets. "Are you all right?" Rachel forced a shaky smile. "Just thinking. Too much happening at once." He nodded, stepping closer. "I know the board meeting was tense, but we're on top of it. Andrew has begun the audit. There's no need to worry too much." She let out a breath. "It's not just that. It's my father. I can't shake the feeling that everything Edgar is digging up might connect to the past." Marcus's gaze flickered with guilt. "Look, I can't change what happened before, but I'm willing to confront it, whatever it is." A silence stretched between them. For a moment, Rachel was struck by how tired he looked. She recalled glimpses of him in the morning, pacing the penthouse, phone in hand, dealing with crisis after crisis. This was a man under immense pressure: family legacy, corporate demands, and a marriage that wasn't entirely real. Impulsively, she reached out and touched his shoulder. "Marcus, I appreciate that. Really." His eyes flicked down to where her hand rested. Then, almost hesitantly, he covered her hand with his own. "I know this started as a business arrangement, but it doesn't have to stay that way. At least not entirely." Her pulse quickened. Was he implying something more? She pulled her hand back gently, words catching in her throat. "We agreed this was a temporary arrangement," she said, trying to keep a level tone. "I'm not sure we should blur those lines." He looked away, a muscle in his jaw tightening. "Right, of course." She felt an odd pang of regret at the hint of disappointment in his voice. Before she could dwell on it, her phone rang, the jarring sound breaking the charged moment. She fumbled to answer. "Rachel!" Thomas Green's voice crackled over the line. "I found something in the city archives, a contract from 20 years ago with the signatures of Henry Stone and Robert Cooper. There's mention of a forced buyout. Could be significant." Her heartbeat jumped. "That's exactly what I've been looking for. Can we meet? I want to see it myself." They arranged to meet at Thomas's small law office that afternoon. Rachel ended the call, adrenaline coursing through her. She barely registered that Marcus was still standing there, watching her. When she finally met his gaze, he appeared conflicted, as if he sensed her priority was the past rather than the present. She hurried to grab her coat and keys. "I need to go. Thomas has information." Marcus nodded stiffly. "I understand. Keep me updated." Without another word, she left the penthouse, her mind torn between relief at a new lead and guilt over the tension she'd left behind. As she rode the elevator down, she replayed Marcus's words, "It doesn't have to stay that way." Why did those words grip her heart so tightly? The brisk walk to the subway gave her time to think. She recognized a surprising truth. Marcus wasn't just a wealthy CEO fulfilling his grandfather's will. He was becoming someone she could actually care about, and that realization scared her more than facing Edgar Coleman. Yet the question remained. How could she reconcile genuine feelings for Marcus while knowing Stone Enterprises might have destroyed her father's life? Could she truly let go of the past and trust him fully? By the time she reached Thomas's office, her emotions were a tangled knot. She steeled herself, determined to focus on one thing at a time, uncovering the truth behind her father's forced buyout. Whatever she felt toward Marcus Stone would have to wait. Right now, her father's legacy and her own sense of justice came first. Thomas's cramped office occupied a narrow space in a mid-rise building downtown. Bare-bones furniture and outdated carpeting gave it a humble feel, a stark contrast to the polished marble of Stone Enterprises. But Rachel found comfort here, no pretense, just a dogged commitment to the law. Thomas greeted her with a quick handshake and beckoned her toward a small table cluttered with file folders and a laptop. "I managed to pull some records from the public archives," he explained. "It took me days of searching, but this could clarify how your father lost his stake in Stone and Cooper." Rachel sank into a wooden chair, her pulse thumping. "Show me." Thomas opened a battered folder, revealing photocopies of a contract from 2 decades ago. The font was small, the language dense, yet the signatures at the bottom drew her attention immediately. Henry Stone, in bold strokes, Robert Cooper in a steadier hand. This agreement granted Stone Enterprises majority ownership in a venture that originally belonged to both Stone and Cooper, Thomas explained, pointing at a clause. "It suggests that your father was forced to sell his shares under terms that appear less than fair." Rachel studied the text, bitterness rising in her chest. "The buyout price was peanuts," she muttered, noticing the figures. "It's basically a pittance, considering the venture's real value." Thomas nodded grimly. "There's more. An addendum indicates that if Cooper disputed the terms publicly, he'd face legal action for breach of contract. This is why your father never talked much about it. He might have been legally gagged." A tremor coursed through Rachel. "So he lost everything because Henry Stone strong-armed him." She closed her eyes, recalling her father's face, the disappointment that lingered in his eyes until his final days. "It matches what I suspected." Thomas cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. I know this must be tough to read, but you need to be careful. If you start making accusations now, Stone Enterprises could retaliate. Legally, the statutes of limitations might complicate any lawsuit." Rachel absorbed his words in silence. How ironic that she now lived with the son of the man who orchestrated her father's downfall. Marcus seemed determined to bring ethics and transparency to Stone Enterprises. But did he know about this? Or had Henry Stone hidden it even from his own family? "Thanks, Thomas," she murmured, looking up from the papers. "I appreciate your help, and I promise I won't do anything reckless." "Not yet." He gathered the files. "I'm here if you need me. Just watch your step. Edgar Coleman would love to use this kind of information to torpedo Marcus's reputation if it benefits him." Rachel stiffened at the thought. She'd grown to believe Marcus was different from Henry. And if she handed these documents to Edgar, it could destroy Marcus, Stone Enterprises, and even any hope of restitution for her father. She realized she held a powerful weapon, but also a dangerous one. Leaving Thomas's office, she clutched the photocopies close as if they were precious relics. Outside, the late afternoon sky had darkened with gathering clouds, reflecting her somber mood. She felt the weight of an impossible dilemma. Should she confront Marcus with this proof? Demand he rectify the injustice, or keep it hidden for leverage, fearful of how he might react? Back at the penthouse, she found Marcus in the kitchen, staring at spreadsheets on his tablet. He looked up when she entered, concern flickering over his features. "Everything okay? You look shaken." She hesitated, her mind racing. Thomas found more details about what happened to my father. Marcus's posture tensed. He set the tablet down. "Tell me," Rachel sighed, pulling the folder from her bag. She handed him the photocopies, carefully watching his reaction. As he read, his brow creased, eyes narrowing at certain passages. When he finished, he exhaled sharply. "This is bad. My father must have—" He broke off, shaking his head. "I didn't know, Rachel, I swear." She studied him, trying to gauge the sincerity in his voice. "So you really had no clue? These contracts, they show how your father pressured mine." Marcus rubbed his temples, frustration evident. "I'm not defending him, but he kept a lot of questionable deals under wraps. I was in college back then, focused on my own future. I never saw these documents." Rachel believed him, at least on some level. "So what do we do now? If I reveal this, it could ruin your company's reputation, but part of me wants the truth out." My father deserved better. He gently set the papers on the kitchen island. "I can't change what Henry did, but I can try to set it right. We can explore ways to compensate you, your family, for what happened. Quietly, if that's your preference." Her heart pounded. Was she prepared to accept a private settlement? She'd hated Stone Enterprises for so long, seeing them as heartless villains. Yet here stood Marcus, offering to take responsibility for his father's sins. She shook her head. "I don't know. It feels complicated. A secret settlement won't clear my father's name. He died believing he'd been cheated." Marcus's gaze was pained. "I understand. All I can offer is to work with you to find a solution that honors your father, but I can't promise it'll be straightforward. The board is already suspicious. If we handle this poorly, Edgar Coleman will weaponize it." Though torn, Rachel nodded. "Let me think about it. I just needed you to know the truth." He reached out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. At one time, she might have recoiled from any gesture of sympathy. Now, it felt like a lifeline in a storm. The bitterness in her heart warred with an unexpected tenderness for the man who, despite everything, seemed determined to stand by her. She slipped away before the emotions could overwhelm her, retreating to her room. That night, as rain pelted the windows, she lay awake, the folder of evidence on her nightstand. She knew she'd hit a wall of secrets, one that threatened her fragile bond with Marcus and the entire future of Stone Enterprises. And somewhere in the darkness, Edgar Coleman lurked, eager to exploit any cracks in their resolve. A few days later, Rachel found herself back in the Stone Enterprises building, but this time she wasn't there for a board meeting or social function. She'd arranged a private discussion with Charlotte Hart in one of the smaller conference rooms. Charlotte greeted her with genuine warmth, gesturing for her to sit at the circular table where a pot of tea waited. "You sounded urgent on the phone," Charlotte said, pouring them each a cup. "Is everything all right?" Rachel took a slow breath, remembering Beverly's advice to confide carefully. Charlotte was one of the few people in this world she felt she could trust. "I've uncovered documents showing my father was pushed out of a partnership with Henry Stone years ago, forced to sell his shares for next to nothing." Charlotte's brow furrowed, sympathy dawning in her eyes. "I knew Henry could be ruthless, but I didn't realize it extended to, well, your father, specifically." "I'm sorry, Rachel." Rachel sipped her tea, the warmth calming her nerves. "I appreciate that. What I need to know is if Stone Enterprises ever recognized wrongdoing and tried to make amends. Did Henry ever discuss regrets or mention a man named Robert Cooper?" Charlotte leaned back, choosing her words carefully. "Henry wasn't the type to openly admit guilt. I recall him referencing old disputes, but never by name. He believed in expanding aggressively, and that meant leaving some people behind." She paused, her eyes clouding. "He told me once that if you want to build an empire, You can't afford to be sentimental. Rachel felt a pang of anger. But he ruined my father's life. Isn't that worth some remorse? Charlotte reached across the table, covering Rachel's hand with hers. I believe so, and I see that Marcus does too. He's not Henry. He genuinely wants to run the company more ethically. If there's a way to rectify this situation, he's the one to do it. Rachel nodded slowly, recalling Marcus's offer to work with her. I think he means well, but we're facing pressure from the board, especially Edgar Coleman. If he learns about my father's story, it could be catastrophic for Marcus. Charlotte pursed her lips. Edgar has always seen Marcus as an obstacle. He'll exploit any weakness to undermine the Stone name and claim more power for himself. You should tread carefully. They spent another hour discussing possibilities, maybe setting up a scholarship or fund in Robert Cooper's name, or even a public acknowledgement of past mistakes. But each option had risks, especially with Edgar prowling for scandal. As Rachel prepared to leave, Charlotte embraced her. Don't lose faith, Rachel. This might be your father's legacy, but it doesn't have to end in tragedy. That evening, Rachel returned to the penthouse, where she found Marcus at the piano. He seldom played, but tonight, gentle notes filled the living room, echoing off the high ceilings. She paused in the doorway, captivated by the unexpected vulnerability in his face as his fingers glided over the keys. When he noticed her, he stopped, hands lifting from the piano as if caught in a private act. Sorry, he murmured. I was just clearing my head. She approached, setting her bag on a nearby armchair. Don't stop. It sounded nice. He ran a hand through his hair. I'm out of practice. My grandfather insisted I learn as a child, but business took over. For a moment they stood in silence, the last notes fading. She thought of all the burdens he carried, leading a company, appeasing a hostile board, and now facing the sins of his father. Without fully knowing why, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I talked to Charlotte today about my father's case. His gaze shifted to the piano keys, jaw tightening. And she believes we should handle this privately, but also do something meaningful to honor my father. A scholarship, perhaps, or a charitable initiative in his name. Rachel's voice trembled. I hate that we have to keep it quiet, but if Edgar finds out... Marcus nodded. We have to be strategic. I get it. And if it helps bring closure, I'm willing to do it. He hesitated, then looked up. It's not enough to undo the pain your father endured, but it's a step. The sincerity in his tone soothed her raw nerves. Suddenly, she felt a rush of gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. I never expected you to take this on, not like this. He gave a half smile. We're in this together, remember? She caught his gaze, and for an instant the room felt electric. Their arrangement might be rooted in practicality, but there was something deeper forming between them. An alliance that transcended the contract. Instead of questioning the moment, she squeezed his hand and stepped away, her heart fluttering. I'm heading to bed soon. Tomorrow, we can discuss details with Beverly and maybe with Andrew, if we trust him enough. Marcus rose from the piano bench, nodding. Good idea. Let's try to make progress before Edgar conjures up his next attack. They parted ways for the night, each retreating to their separate rooms. Yet as Rachel settled into bed, the echoes of the piano lingered in her thoughts. The music, Marcus's quiet resolve, and Charlotte's encouragement all wove together into a cautious sense of hope. In the darkness, she held on to that feeling, recalling Charlotte's words, "It doesn't have to end in tragedy." After all the bitterness and heartbreak, maybe there was a path forward, one where she could both honor her father and embrace a future she never expected to want. Only time would tell if that fragile hope could stand against the looming threats from Edgar Coleman and the weight of Stone Enterprises' past. Sunlight spilled into the penthouse's open living area the next morning, illuminating the sleek furnishings and the glinting trophies of past Stone Enterprises accolades. Rachel was already awake, sipping coffee as she reviewed notes for the day. A meeting with Andrew Wallace loomed. She and Marcus planned to address the best way to rectify Robert Cooper's forced buyout without sparking boardroom chaos. Marcus emerged from his bedroom, suit jacket draped over one arm. "Ready?" he asked, voice still laced with sleep. She nodded, setting down her mug. "As I'll ever be." They arrived at Andrew's office on the upper floors of the Stone Enterprises building. Andrew greeted them in the reception area, ushering them into a glass-walled conference room. His expression was guarded but professional. "I assume this is about the sensitive matter you hinted at, Marcus?" Marcus inclined his head. "Yes, and it stays between us for now." He glanced at Rachel, silently urging her to explain. She inhaled, steadying her nerves. "My father was Robert Cooper, Henry Stone's former partner. We have proof he was coerced into giving up his shares at a fraction of their value. We want to address this, make it right, but we can't afford a public scandal." Andrew's eyes widened, though he quickly masked his shock. "I see. Well, legally, the statute of limitations might bar a direct lawsuit. However, there are ways to offer compensation or acknowledgement without admitting formal guilt. A private settlement, for instance." Marcus sat forward, brow furrowing. "We were thinking of something more meaningful than just money, maybe a philanthropic fund in Cooper's name." Andrew rubbed his chin. "That could be beneficial, especially if launched discreetly. But I must stress how carefully we handle this. Edgar Coleman would leap at the chance to accuse you of covering up corporate malfeasance. He'd spin it as hush money if it suits his agenda." Rachel felt a prickle of unease. "I understand. But my father deserves recognition, and I want the board to know his name in a respectful way, even if we can't reveal everything publicly." Andrew nodded, scribbling notes. "We can craft a plan. For now, keep all details confidential. I'll work on a strategy to present to certain board members you trust, like Charlotte Hart, perhaps, and gauge support." After the meeting wrapped up, Rachel followed Marcus down the hallway, tension etched into her features. "This is it then," she said under her breath. "We're stepping onto a tightrope. One wrong move and Edgar will pounce." Marcus placed a reassuring hand at the small of her back. "We'll be cautious. I promise." Later that day, Rachel found a moment of solace in a quiet corner of the company's in-house cafe. She needed a breather from the constant negotiations, the hush-hush conversations, and the weight of her father's legacy. Sipping a chamomile tea, she thought back to how her life had changed so drastically. Yes, the contract with Marcus had solved her financial woes, but it had also hurled her into a moral and emotional labyrinth. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, a message from Lisa. "Hey, how's the high life? Miss you at the restaurant." A pang of nostalgia hit her. She typed back, "Miss you too. Let's catch up soon. Things are complicated." Before she could elaborate, footsteps approached. She looked up to see Edgar Coleman sliding into the seat opposite her. Her heart skipped a beat, immediate alarm flooding her system. "Mrs. Stone," he said with calculated politeness, "taking a break from orchestrating the Empire's next moves." She set her phone aside, schooling her features into composure. "I just needed some tea." "Is there something I can help you with?" He offered a thin smile, his fingertips drumming on the tabletop. "I couldn't help noticing how involved you've become in company affairs. Quite remarkable for someone so new to this world." Rachel shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I'm learning the ropes, supporting my husband." His gaze turned sharper. "And how is that going for you?" "Must be challenging. stepping into a legacy built over generations. Sometimes the past can be treacherous. Her pulse hammered. Was he fishing for information about her father? Every legacy has its complexities. I'm sure you know that better than anyone, Mr. Coleman. He leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. Indeed, I do. I just hope you understand the gravity of the situation you're in. The Stone name carries a lot of weight, and not all of it is good. Should any skeletons come tumbling out of the closet, well, let's just say it won't be pretty. Rachel met his gaze squarely. If there are issues, we'll address them. We're not afraid of the truth. Edgar's smile didn't reach his eyes. Ah, the truth. A slippery concept in the corporate world. I admire your optimism. With that, he stood, giving her a curt nod. Enjoy the rest of your tea, Mrs. Stone. I look forward to seeing how your truth unfolds. Then he left, his polished shoes clicking against the polished floor. Rachel forced herself to breathe evenly, heart pounding. Edgar's words felt like a challenge, a warning that he suspected more than he let on. She finished her tea quickly, no longer taking any comfort from its warmth. When she rejoined Marcus upstairs, she told him about the encounter. His jaw tightened, a flicker of anger in his eyes. He's baiting you, trying to make you slip. She sank onto a leather chair in his office. I know, but it confirms that we have to move carefully. He'll seize any evidence of wrongdoing from the past to tear you down. Marcus nodded, his expression grim yet resolute. Then we'll be ready. Let Edgar posture all he wants. We have work to do, an unseen battle to fight. In that moment, Rachel realized just how high the stakes had become. The secret of her father's forced buyout was only one piece of a larger puzzle, one that threatened not only Marcus's position, but also the entire Stone legacy. And there she was, right in the center, bound to a man she was starting to trust, if not care for. Steeling herself, she understood they were approaching a crucial turning point. The next steps would define everything, from how the board perceived them, to the fate of her father's memory, to the fragile hope she and Marcus had nurtured in the shadows of a contract marriage. They would have to face whatever came next with courage, no matter how steep the cost. A tense hush fell over the Stone Enterprises boardroom as Marcus and Rachel took their seats at the large, polished table. Rows of windows revealed the twilight skyline, the city lights blinking on like scattered fireflies in the distance. Everyone had gathered for a critical update on the company's internal audit, the one Marcus had ordered to quell Edgar Coleman's incessant insinuations of impropriety. Andrew Wallace, looking more fatigued than ever, stood at the head of the table. He cleared his throat. We've completed a preliminary review of subsidiary contracts. Several documents from the past decade raise questions of compliance, though nothing blatantly illegal. Edgar Coleman sat to Andrew's left, fingertips drumming against the table. Nothing illegal yet, he drawled, a thin smile twisting his features. I trust we're digging deeper. Andrew's eyes flickered over to Marcus. Yes, we'll expand the investigation if the board deems it necessary. Marcus dipped his head in agreement. We have nothing to hide. If further scrutiny is required, we'll do it. A low murmur spread among the board members. Rachel felt a familiar knot of anxiety tug at her stomach. She glanced around, noticing how some members seemed relieved while others wore furrowed brows. Edgar alone looked unsatisfied, as if he craved a bigger scandal. When the meeting adjourned, Edgar lingered, leaning toward Rachel. I hear you and Marcus have been taking special interest in the company's older files, he said quietly, voice dripping with insinuation. Such dedication from a newcomer like yourself. Rachel forced a steady gaze. Marcus values my input. We want Stone Enterprises to be transparent, as we've said countless times. He offered a thin laugh, leaning back. I see. Well, I do hope your diligence pays off. With that, he strode away, leaving her bristling. Marcus joined her, exhaling. He's not even pretending to be civil anymore. He wants something, Rachel said, pressing her lips together, and he suspects we're hiding it. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll handle Edgar. Don't let him rattle you. Yet as they left the boardroom, the weight of Edgar's gaze lingered like a storm cloud. That night in the penthouse, the atmosphere felt just as charged. Thunder rumbled in the distance, lightning briefly illuminating the vast windows. Rachel stood in the kitchen, stirring a cup of herbal tea. Despite the tension at the office, she found a comforting rhythm in these small domestic moments, an odd sense of normalcy in an otherwise surreal situation. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Hey," he said softly. He looked exhausted, tie undone around his collar. "Is there more tea?" She poured him a mug, and for a moment they just stood, side by side, sipping in silence while rain began to patter against the glass. Finally, Rachel spoke. "Andrew said the audit results aren't conclusive yet. Do you think Edgar will keep pushing?" Marcus grimaced, setting his mug down. "Absolutely. He'll claim a cover-up until he finds something tangible. And if he doesn't find anything, he'll try to invent it." Rachel's chest felt tight. "In all of this, we still haven't figured out how to publicly address my father's forced buyout. We're stuck between wanting to do what's right and risking that Edgar turns it into a weapon." Marcus hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I've been thinking maybe we should gather a small circle of allies, like Charlotte Hart, perhaps Thomas Green, to discuss how to approach it. A quiet strategy meeting. If we can show the board we're handling past grievances responsibly, it might deflate Edgar's argument that Stone Enterprises is a moral swamp." Rachel mulled that over. "It's risky, but if we can prove your father's actions were separate from your own, maybe the board will support you. They just need to see you're not covering anything up." He nodded, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. "Precisely. We either confront this head-on or let Edgar keep poisoning the atmosphere." They fell silent, listening to the rain intensify. Another flash of lightning lit the penthouse, followed by a rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the windows. Rachel found her gaze drifting to Marcus, noticing how the lightning etched shadows across his features. He was so composed in public, yet behind closed doors he looked almost vulnerable. In a burst of resolve, she reached out and laid a hand on his arm. "No matter what happens, I'm in this with you." He stared down at her hand, then met her eyes. "We might lose a lot, Rachel. Even if we do everything right, it could still blow up in our faces." She felt a pang of fear at the thought. This had started as a sham to secure Marcus's inheritance and rescue her from debt. But now they risked losing something deeper: trust, potential happiness, even each other if the truth tore them apart. Clutching her mug, she mustered a small smile. Sometimes doing what's right is worth the risk. Marcus gave a faint nod, and for a moment she saw gratitude in his gaze. They stood there, listening to the thunder roll, bound by an unspoken pact. The storm outside mirrored the tensions brewing within Stone Enterprises, and within their complicated relationship. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the skyline lights into smears of color. Rachel couldn't help but feel that everything was converging toward a crucial breaking point. Edgar's manipulations, the board's suspicions, and the painful legacy of her father's betrayal all seemed to accelerate, gathering force like the storm raging outside. Still, she told herself, storms eventually pass, and after the tumult, if they survived, maybe they'd find clarity or even redemption in the rain-washed dawn. A week later, a subdued group gathered in the penthouse's living room, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Charlotte Hart arrived first, offering Rachel a reassuring hug. Andrew Wallace, carrying a laptop stuffed with legal summaries, set up at the coffee table. Thomas Green entered last, holding a slim folder of newly discovered documents. Marcus greeted each of them with terse politeness, then indicated the sofa and chairs arranged in a semicircle. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he said, voice grave. "We need your advice and your discretion." Rachel perched on the edge of an armchair, fiddling with a pen. She felt a wave of nerves as she surveyed the small group. These were their allies, the people they trusted to help navigate a minefield of old wrongdoing and new corporate threats. Charlotte cleared her throat gently. "Marcus, Rachel, I understand there's a sensitive matter involving your father, Rachel, and also the risk of Edgar Coleman exploiting it." Rachel glanced at Thomas. "He found more proof that Henry Stone forced my dad out of a partnership. It's beyond doubt now." Thomas opened his folder, passing around copies. "These documents confirm Robert Cooper's shares were undervalued. Henry Stone then legally prevented him from speaking out." A hush fell. Andrew broke it, tapping the papers. "Under normal circumstances, the statute of limitations would protect Stone Enterprises from direct liability. But morally, and potentially in the court of public opinion, it's a ticking time bomb." Marcus folded his arms. "If Edgar Coleman ever gets hold of this, he'll spin it to discredit me. He'll claim I've inherited the same ruthless instincts, that I'm covering up a family crime." Charlotte frowned, sympathy for Rachel visible in her eyes. "What do you propose?" Rachel took a breath. "We want to acknowledge this wrongdoing, maybe a scholarship or fund in my father's name, plus a private statement to the board that Marcus is making amends. But how do we do it without creating a massive scandal?" Thomas leaned forward. "Perhaps you could add a philanthropic initiative to an existing Stone Enterprises program. Frame it as an expansion of the company's renewed ethical commitments. Mention Robert Cooper's story in broad terms, like helping those who've lost out in unfair business deals. Keep specifics vague." Andrew nodded thoughtfully. "If this is presented as a forward-looking correction of past mistakes, it might satisfy both your conscience and the board's concerns. You'll need the board's approval for any major new fund, though, and that's where Edgar could attack." Marcus exhaled. "Yes, we'll have to rally enough support beforehand." Charlotte raised her hand gently. "I can help with that. Many board members respect me for my charitable work. If I explain the moral imperative, it might sway a few hearts, especially those who've grown weary of Edgar's negativity." Rachel felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Charlotte." They spent the next hour hammering out details: the fund's mission statement, the best timing for disclosure, and how to present it to the board. All the while, Rachel's mind churned with conflicting emotions. Part of her feared unveiling this at all. It was like pulling back a curtain on her father's suffering. Yet another part of her felt relief, even hope, that his story would finally be acknowledged. When the meeting ended, Andrew and Thomas departed with solemn goodbyes, promising to refine the legal and public relations angles. Charlotte lingered a moment, touching Rachel's arm. "You're doing the right thing, dear, even if it's complicated." Rachel nodded, eyes moist. "I hope so. Thank you for standing with us." Once Charlotte left, Marcus walked over to the large windows, staring out at the skyline. His reflection in the glass seemed weighed down by unspoken burdens. "This might blow up in our faces," he said quietly. Rachel joined him, pressing a tentative hand against his shoulder. "It might. But at least we won't be living a lie. If we're truly different from Henry Stone, we have to prove it." He turned, his gaze filled with a mix of anxiety and resolve. "It's not just about me. It's about you, your father, and our marriage. The board will question everything. They'll pick apart our story, trying to find hypocrisy." She steeled herself. "Then we stand together. I meant it when I said I'm not leaving you to face this alone. For a moment, the tension between them gave way to something softer. Marcus gently brushed a lock of hair from her face, an uncharacteristic tenderness in his touch. She almost leaned in, letting the warmth of his presence soothe her, but then the phone rang, shattering the moment. He turned away, picking up the call with a weary sigh. Rachel closed her eyes briefly, feeling the distance again. They were on the brink of a grand confrontation, uncertain if their growing bond would endure the coming storm. She headed to her room, letting him handle the call. Yet as she walked away, she carried with her the faint hope that, despite everything, they were forging a new path, one shaped by honesty, accountability, and perhaps even genuine affection. A week later, Marcus and Rachel arrived hand in hand at the Stone Enterprises' annual shareholder gala, a lavish affair held in an ornate ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light across polished marble floors, while live classical music floated from a corner stage. Rows of tables, draped in fine linens, were crowded with the company's shareholders, investors, and high-profile guests. The plan was to unveil the new philanthropic fund near the event's end, surprising the board in a carefully choreographed reveal that Charlotte and Andrew had helped orchestrate. Rachel's heart pounded at the thought. Would Edgar try to derail them before they could speak? Marcus, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, squeezed Rachel's hand as they entered the foyer. "We've got this," he whispered, though a tremor of nerves flickered in his eyes. She gave him a tight smile, adjusting the flowing burgundy gown Beverly had helped her choose. Inside, a flurry of smiles and handshakes greeted them. Edgar Coleman, standing near a group of shareholders, offered a sardonic bow. "Marcus, Mrs. Stone, how grand you both look." "Thank you, Edgar," Marcus replied evenly, releasing Rachel's hand to shake Edgar's. "I trust we'll have a productive evening." Edgar's thin smile curled. "No doubt. I'm quite curious to see how your latest plans unfold." He cast a pointed glance at Rachel. "I suspect there's more on tonight's agenda than fine dining." Rachel's pulse kicked up, but she forced a polite nod. "Indeed, we're eager to share some news." With that, Edgar stepped aside, letting them pass. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that he was like a prowling cat, waiting for a moment to pounce. Charlotte was already seated at the head table alongside a few senior board members, flashing Rachel a reassuring wink as they approached. When they took their seats, conversation meandered from recent market trends to philanthropic ventures. Rachel maintained a poised facade, though her mind churned with anticipation. After dinner was served, the CEO, Marcus, was traditionally expected to speak. This time, the stakes were higher than any previous gala. As waiters cleared plates, a hush fell across the ballroom. Marcus rose, buttoning his jacket. He glanced at Rachel, then strode to the microphone at the center of the stage. "Good evening, everyone," he began, voice resonating through the cavernous space. "Thank you for joining us at Stone Enterprises' annual shareholder gala. It's an honor to stand before you tonight, especially with so many questions and challenges facing our company." A murmur swept the room. Marcus paused, scanning the faces. Rachel watched from her seat, heart pounding so loudly she worried others could hear it. She saw Edgar standing at the periphery, arms crossed. "For years, Stone Enterprises has pushed for growth," Marcus continued. "But in that pursuit, mistakes were made, some in my grandfather's and father's eras, and I want to address that tonight. Moving forward, we must commit to rectifying wrongs, embracing transparency, and supporting those harmed by unethical practices in the past." There was a collective inhalation. Board members glanced at one another uneasily. Edgar's posture went rigid, eyes narrowing. Marcus gestured toward Rachel. "My wife, Rachel Stone, has brought a deeply personal matter to my attention. Her father was once a partner in an early venture that was acquired by Stone Enterprises. The acquisition was flawed, and it cost her father dearly. The buzz of whispers intensified, nearly drowning Marcus out. Still, he pressed on. Tonight, I'm announcing the Robert Cooper Fund, a philanthropic initiative dedicated to supporting small business owners and entrepreneurs who've experienced unfair buyouts or financial ruin. Stone Enterprises will fund this effort to ensure future partners are never left behind as we strive for success. Rachel's chest tightened with mingled pride and fear. It was out in the open now. She could almost feel Edgar's glare burning a hole through her back. As applause rose, some genuine, some hesitant, Marcus stepped down from the stage. Charlotte took the mic to outline the fund's mission, skillfully guiding the narrative to emphasize Stone Enterprises' renewed commitment to ethics and community. In the swirl of clapping and chatter, Rachel caught sight of Edgar moving toward the stage. Her stomach dropped. Was he about to publicly challenge Marcus's announcement? She darted forward, intercepting him. "Edgar," she said coolly, heart pounding, "enjoying the presentation." His expression twisted in a sarcastic smirk. "I must admit it was theatrical. But I'm curious. Did you or Marcus mention the specific details of how your dear father lost his shares? Or are we just glossing over actual wrongdoing with a charitable band-aid?" She held his gaze, refusing to let him see her falter. "We're not glossing over anything. This fund is a start, not a cover-up." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If the board demands a deeper inquiry, do you think your little speech will be enough? Or will they want to see the contracts, the timeline, every ugly detail?" Rachel inhaled sharply, struggling to maintain composure. "We're prepared to face the truth." Edgar's lips curled into a humorless grin. "If you say so, Mrs. Stone. But you'd better hope your husband's empire can withstand that truth, because I intend to push for more answers. And soon." He turned on his heel and disappeared into the dispersing crowd. Rachel's hand shook as she stood there, the triumph of the announcement overshadowed by Edgar's threat. She forced herself to breathe, scanning the ballroom until she spotted Marcus talking with a knot of shareholders. As Charlotte ended her speech to enthusiastic applause, Rachel moved to join Marcus, stepping into the ring of curious onlookers. She managed a polite smile, but inside she felt the walls closing in. Yes, they'd taken a bold step toward rectifying the past, but at what cost? Looking into Marcus's eyes, she wondered if he felt it too, the creeping sense that their biggest battle had only just begun. The spotlight was shining on them now, bright and unforgiving, and Edgar Coleman stood in the shadows, ready to pounce at the first sign of weakness. Later that night, after the gala's excitement had faded, Rachel retreated to the penthouse with Marcus Beverly, who had quietly organized all the night's details, lingered briefly to congratulate them. She praised the announcement of the Robert Cooper Fund as inspiring and overdue, then left them to their own thoughts. Neither Rachel nor Marcus felt like sleeping, so they settled in the living room, still dressed in their formal attire. The city's neon glow cast shifting colors through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Tonight should have felt like a victory," Marcus murmured, loosening his bow tie. "But Edgar's face, his words, it's like we just declared war on him." Rachel nodded, tension in her shoulders. "He wants to expose every detail, twist it into a scandal. And now the board might press for a deeper investigation into Henry's actions." Marcus slumped onto the leather couch. "If that happens, they'll scrutinize everything from accounting ledgers to internal memos. They'll look for any sign that I was complicit or that we've lied." Rachel sank beside him, careful not to wrinkle her gown. "We knew this was a risk, but we did the right thing, didn't we?" He leaned back, eyes closed. "Yes, we did. Just the right thing can come with a heavy price." Silence enveloped them for a moment, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Rachel reached for Marcus's hand, hesitating before her fingertips brushed his. Slowly, he laced his fingers with hers, and they sat like that, breathing in unison. She thought of all that had transpired since she first signed the marriage contract, her father's forced buyout revelations, the swirl of corporate power plays, and the unexpected bond forming between herself and Marcus. The lines between duty, conscience, and personal attachment had blurred into something she could no longer define neatly. After a while, Marcus opened his eyes. "We should prepare ourselves. Edgar won't just demand answers from the board, he might go public. Leak documents, spin sensational stories. He's not above dragging your father's name through the mud either, just to sow confusion." Rachel stiffened, recalling Edgar's threat at the gala. "He has no respect for the dead or the living. All he cares about is seizing control." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "That's why we stay united. No matter what he throws at us, we confront it together." She offered a thin smile, her heart pounding with both fear and gratitude. Before she could reply, a discreet chime sounded, her phone. With a sigh, she extracted it from her clutch. Thomas Green's number flashed on the screen. "Thomas," she answered, voice tight. "Is everything all right?" Thomas sounded breathless. "I just received a tip from an old contact in the legal sphere. There's talk that Edgar is meeting with a journalist from the City Times tomorrow morning." Rachel's stomach lurched. "He's going to leak something, isn't he?" "Likely. He's probably planning to feed them a slanted story about the Robert Cooper Fund, implying it's a cover-up." Thomas paused, voice tense. "He might also reveal partial documents about your father's forced buyout. With the right spin, it'll look damning." She covered the mouthpiece, whispering the news to Marcus, who muttered a curse under his breath. "What should we do?" she asked Thomas. "Get ahead of it," Thomas urged. "Release a statement clarifying the fund's purpose. Reinforce Stone Enterprises' commitment to transparency. If you let Edgar control the narrative, he'll paint you as liars." After the call ended, Marcus stood, shoulders squared. "We need to draft a statement first thing in the morning, maybe hold a press conference by midday. I'll speak directly to the City Times or any other outlet that might listen." Rachel nodded, standing as well. "I can't hide in the background. If my father's going to be a talking point, I need to speak too." He hesitated, clearly protective. "Are you sure you want to be that exposed? The media can be brutal." Her jaw tightened. "I'm sure. I won't let Edgar hijack my father's story. I want the world to know what really happened and that we're trying to make it right." Marcus studied her, a blend of admiration and concern coloring his features. Then he nodded. "All right. We do this together." They spent the next hour tossing around ideas. They decided on a direct approach, admit wrongdoing in the past and emphasize the newly established Cooper Fund's genuine intent. Provide simple, factual details without lying or omitting major truths. When they finally retired for the night, exhaustion pressed on Rachel's eyelids, yet sleep evaded her, crowded out by the swirl of impending confrontations. Tomorrow, they would step into a public spotlight sharper than any they'd faced before. One wrong word, one misstep, and Edgar Coleman would pounce like a waiting predator. She buried her face in the pillow, forcing herself to take steady breaths. She had walked into this marriage to escape poverty and to uncover the truth about her father's legacy. Now, that quest threatened to tear down not just Stone Enterprises, but the fragile trust she'd built with Marcus. Still, she refused to falter. If doing the right thing came at a steep price, she would pay it, because some truths deserved the light of day, no matter how painful the glare. By late morning, the main lobby of Stone Enterprises had been transformed into an impromptu press area. Rows of chairs faced a small platform outfitted with microphones and a backdrop emblazoned with the company logo. Camera crews and journalists bustled about, whispering to each other, checking equipment, and waiting for the official statement that promised to address significant matters regarding the future of Stone Enterprises. Behind a tall curtain, Rachel stood next to Marcus, hearts hammering in unison. Beverly fussed with Marcus's tie while Andrew Wallace hovered nearby, clutching a folder of talking points. A handful of security personnel loitered discreetly, prepared for any chaotic turn. "Showtime," Andrew muttered, offering a strained smile. "We're live streaming to several outlets, by the way, just so you know." Marcus exhaled, turning to Rachel. "We stick to the plan. Honesty, clarity, no apologies for what we haven't done, but acceptance of the company's past mistakes." She nodded, mentally rehearsing her lines. They had agreed she would speak first, sharing a brief testimony about her father's forced buyout, followed by Marcus's outline of the Cooper Fund. Then they would open the floor to questions. A hush fell as they stepped onto the platform, bright lights from cameras searing their eyes. The press corps filled the chairs, with Edgar Coleman conspicuously present in the front row, arms folded. An unsettling smirk curved his lips. Rachel's chest tightened. Ignoring Edgar, she approached the mic. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline racing through her veins. "My name is Rachel Cooper Stone. Until recently, I was unaware of how deeply my family's past intersected with Stone Enterprises. I've since learned that my late father, Robert Cooper, lost his business and life savings due to unfair practices initiated by Henry Stone." A ripple of murmurs spread across the crowd. Cameras clicked. Rachel pressed on, determined not to falter. "This knowledge has been painful and complicated, especially given my recent marriage to Marcus Stone. I'm here to clarify that neither Marcus nor I will hide the truth. Instead, we have established the Robert Cooper Fund as a direct effort to address and rectify historical wrongs." She stepped back, ceding the microphone to Marcus. He straightened, gaze sweeping the audience. "Stone Enterprises must evolve. We can't change past actions, but we can change how we move forward. My grandfather and father built this empire, sometimes using methods that hurt people. We recognize that, and we're committed to making amends where possible." He paused, flipping through note cards, but then set them aside, choosing candor over a scripted speech. "We're funding this initiative substantially, not as a temporary gesture, but as a lasting program to support small business owners who face unjust corporate pressure. Stone Enterprises will stand for fair practices and accountability from here on out." A smattering of applause rose. Though many reporters still wore guarded expressions, Marcus glanced at Andrew, who nodded. Then Marcus opened the floor for questions. Immediately, hands shot up. One journalist asked, "Does this mean you're admitting Stone Enterprises broke the law in the past?" Marcus shook his head. "I can't speak for every legal nuance, but unethical behavior doesn't always equate to criminal convictions. Our stance is that, legal or not, it was wrong." Another voice piped up. "Mrs. Stone, why remain married to a man whose family wronged yours?" Rachel inhaled sharply. Edgar, in the front row, arched an eyebrow, awaiting her response. "Because Marcus is not his father or grandfather. He's striving to change the culture here, and I believe real change starts at the top, with honesty." Before she could finish, Edgar stood abruptly. "So you're telling us there's no scandal? That your father's forced buyout was simply a bad decision, not a criminal conspiracy?" A hush fell as he advanced toward the platform. Security tensed, but Marcus gestured for them to stay back. Edgar seized the microphone from a stunned reporter, pointing it toward Rachel. "Tell me, Mrs. Stone, did you discover your father's contract before or after you chose to marry Marcus? Because it seems awfully convenient. You leverage your father's misfortune to negotiate a better position within the company, perhaps even a bigger share of the inheritance. Gasps rippled through the room. Rachel's cheeks burned. She glanced at Marcus, who looked thunderous. But she steadied herself, meeting Edgar's gaze. You can insinuate all you want, Mr. Coleman, but I had no idea of the specifics until after I'd married Marcus. My father died years ago, and I had only fragments of the story. If you're implying I'm married for profit, you're wrong. Edgar's smirk never wavered. Then how do you explain your rapid ascent? The massive sum your so-called philanthropic fund will receive. Isn't it a convenient payoff for your father's silence? Fury coiled in Rachel's chest, yet she kept her composure. No, this fund ensures no one else endures what he did, forced out, silenced, broken financially. If you want to twist that into a conspiracy, you're free to do so. Marcus stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Rachel's shoulder. We've answered your question, Edgar. Unless you have anything constructive to add, this press conference is over. Edgar glared, but stepped back, ceding the microphone. Tension roiled through the room. Slowly, another reporter asked a more measured question, guiding the session back to civility. Despite the chaos, Rachel felt a surprising sense of relief. Yes, Edgar had tried to corner them publicly, but she hadn't faltered, and Marcus had stood by her, unwavering. When the press conference ended, applause mingled with anxious chatter. Some reporters pursued them, hungry for exclusives, but security intervened. In the elevator ride back to the top floor, Rachel's nerves finally broke, and her eyes stung with unshed tears. Marcus gently placed an arm around her, not caring who saw. You were incredible, he murmured. She breathed shakily, relief and exhaustion tangling in her chest. So were you. As the elevator doors slid open, they stepped into the executive corridor, the world's clamor sealed behind them. This had been their crucible, where they faced Edgar and the media head-on, refusing to cower or lie. They might not yet be free from scrutiny, but at least the truth was out, standing in the daylight for all to see. In the hallway's hush, Marcus turned to her, eyes reflecting both pride and lingering tension. We've weathered the worst of it, I think, he said, though uncertainty still glimmered beneath his words. Rachel didn't know if that was true, but for now she would take the momentary calm as a victory. They had stood together, and neither the past nor Edgar's machinations had managed to tear them apart, yet. The morning after the press conference, a soft drizzle misted over Manhattan's skyline. Inside the penthouse, Rachel stood by the expansive windows, gazing at the muted silhouette of the city. Sleep had been fitful after the previous day's events. Each time she closed her eyes, she replayed Edgar Coleman's public ambush, the bright camera flashes, and the electric tension in Marcus's voice as he defended their cause. A sudden ring echoed through the living room, making her jump. She hurried to answer the call, heart pounding, though she tried to calm herself. It was Beverly, sounding cheerful despite the early hour. Good news, Beverly announced. The initial headlines are surprisingly balanced. Some outlets are praising your honesty. Relief coursed through Rachel's veins, though she kept a measured tone. Thanks, Beverly. I was worried they'd run with Edgar's spin. Beverly let out a wry chuckle. He certainly tried. But people respond better to sincerity than theatrics, at least for now. I'll forward you a few articles worth reading. See you soon. When the call ended, Rachel exhaled, a strange mix of elation and dread. The immediate crisis might have passed. But the real work, reforming the company culture and honoring her father's legacy, had only begun. She sensed the slightest whisper of hope that maybe they could pull this off. Footsteps padded behind her. Turning, she found Marcus in casual clothes, grey trousers and a sweater, his eyes still shadowed from lack of sleep. Without speaking, he joined her at the window, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. The weight of his touch felt grounding, and she placed her own hand atop his, acknowledging a closeness that had grown stronger in adversity. "How are you holding up?" he asked, voice low. "I woke up, and you weren't there." "Figured you might be anxious." She mustered a half smile. "Just needed to see the city, remind myself that life goes on out there." Marcus nodded, gaze drifting over the hazy skyline. "Beverly told me about the media coverage. It's more balanced than I expected." He hesitated, inhaling. "We should use this momentum. Schedule a follow-up interview or two, reinforce what we said yesterday, and talk more about the Cooper Fund." Her heart fluttered at the mention of the fund. "I want to start meeting people who could benefit from it. Small business owners in trouble. Maybe some who've been forced out of partnerships like my father. Give it a personal touch." A flicker of respect crossed his features. "I'll ask Charlotte to arrange introductions. She has connections with local community groups." They fell silent, comforted by the simple act of standing together. Then, as if guided by the same unspoken need, they turned from the window and prepared to face another day at Stone Enterprises. When they arrived, a subdued hush enveloped the corporate floors. Employees offered courteous nods, a tangible shift from the wary glances that had followed Rachel before. Perhaps the open acknowledgement of her father's story had sparked empathy, or maybe it was the press coverage painting Marcus and Rachel not as opportunists, but as a couple determined to right past wrongs. In the executive corridor, Beverly greeted them with a stack of reports. Thomas Green emailed updates. He's heard murmurs that Edgar's attempt to spin the story is losing traction. Board members are more curious about the details of the Cooper Fund than scandalizing it. Marcus skimmed the documents. "How many of them want a private meeting with me?" "At least 5, Beverly answered, "including the more conservative members who usually side with Edgar. They want to know how the fund will operate and if it affects dividends." Rachel stepped forward, scanning the list of names. "So, we'll need a plan, transparency, but also reassurance that Stone Enterprises isn't funneling away their investments, right?" "Exactly," Beverly agreed. "Also, the PR team suggests a formal event to launch the Cooper Fund, something that can garner positive press and overshadow any lingering negativity Edgar might sow." Marcus handed the reports back to Beverly. "Let's move on it. We can't let the narrative stall." "Edgar thrives when there's a vacuum of information." Beverly nodded and left to set up the meetings. Once alone, Rachel looked up at Marcus. "You're really stepping into this new role, almost a reformer within your own company." Pride laced her tone, yet she understood the weight he bore. He shrugged, a small, self-conscious grin appearing. "My father and grandfather built an empire with questionable methods. If I don't try to change it, who will?" His face turned serious. "And if we fail, we won't," Rachel interjected firmly. "We've come this far." That afternoon, as the pace at the office slowed, Marcus and Rachel retreated to his corner office, shutting the door behind them. Tall glass walls offered a panoramic view of the sun breaking through lingering clouds. Rachel felt a surge of gratitude for the relative quiet after the stormy events of the past few days. Marcus leaned against his desk, folding his arms. "I talked to my mother this morning. She said she's proud of our decision to be open about the company's past. That's not something I ever expected to hear from her." Rachel recalled Victoria Stone's refined, somewhat distant demeanor. "She never seemed the warmest person, but I'm glad she's showing support." Nodding, he glanced at the cityscape. "I never realized how hungry I was for a different kind of legacy. Sometimes I think I wanted to prove to my grandfather that I could hold the empire together without stooping to his tactics." Stepping closer, Rachel placed a hand gently on his arm. You already have, Marcus. And now it's about building something new on top of that foundation. She hesitated, swallowing her own uncertainty. Thank you for standing by me, for not letting Edgar's accusations tear us apart. His gaze fell on her with an intensity that made her heart skip. I could say the same. You've shown more courage than anyone I've known. He paused, inhaling as though weighing his next words. Rachel, whatever started this marriage, He trailed off, searching her face. Tension crackled in the air, an unspoken admission hovering between them. Before either could gather the courage to speak more plainly, a knock at the door shattered the moment. Beverly poked her head in, apologetic. I'm sorry, but the board members have arrived for a quick briefing. Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling. Of course, we'll be right there. Rachel bit back a sigh, both relieved and disappointed by the interruption. As they left the office, she reminded herself that they had time to figure out the shifting lines of their relationship once the urgent fires had been doused. For now, she braced her shoulders for another corporate battle, determined to protect the fragile progress they had made. They would rebuild Stone Enterprises in the wake of the truth, and in doing so, perhaps find a more authentic path for themselves as well. A full week passed after the explosive press conference, and the corporate environment settled into an uneasy equilibrium. The Robert Cooper Fund occupied a prime segment on Stone Enterprises' website, reflecting a renewed commitment to ethical practices. Board members who had once been skeptical, particularly those fearful of Edgar Coleman's aggressive tactics, softened their stance when they saw investors responding positively to the company's new moral direction. For Rachel, days blurred into a series of meetings, public relations sessions, and philanthropic planning. Each morning, she rose early, exchanged a few curt pleasantries with Marcus over coffee, and then tackled her responsibilities. They found themselves working side by side, presenting a united front to the world. Yet in private, an emotional undercurrent lingered between them, intense but unspoken. On a crisp Monday morning, Rachel slipped into the penthouse kitchen to find Marcus hunched over a laptop, reviewing a spreadsheet. He glanced up, managing a faint smile. Morning. I'm going over projected budgets for the Cooper Fund. Turns out we have more applicants than expected, some from out of state. She poured herself a cup of coffee, leaning over his shoulder. That's a good problem to have. Means people trust it's real, that will actually help. He closed the laptop, rubbing his temples. I want to be sure we manage expectations. We can't fix everything overnight. Rachel nodded, memories of her father's struggles flashing in her mind. Even one family saved from total ruin might be enough to honor Dad's name. She paused, hesitating. I've been thinking we should visit some of these businesses ourselves, show them that this fund isn't just a PR stunt. A spark of interest lit Marcus's eyes. Hands-on involvement would make a statement. Let's arrange that. Maybe Charlotte can suggest a few local candidates. Relief and excitement mingled in Rachel's chest. Great, let's do it. Arriving at Stone Enterprises that same morning, they were greeted by curious but cordial employees. Andrew Wallace intercepted them near the elevator with a grin. I've just come from a board subcommittee. They want to highlight the Cooper Fund at next month's shareholders report. Possibly a dedicated segment praising your leadership. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Our leadership, you mean Rachel's as much a part of this as I am? Andrew chuckled. Of course, they still need to see the final numbers before it's official, but it's leaning positive. Edgar's push for a separate ethics investigation never gained enough traction. He's strangely quiet these days. Rachel's spine prickled at that. Edgar never stayed silent without reason. As if reading her thoughts, Andrew sighed. He's probably regrouping, but for now, the board is cooperating. Let's hope it lasts. They parted ways, and Marcus and Rachel walked together down the wide corridor. Their footsteps echoed in tandem, an unspoken rhythm developing as they tackled daily tasks. This routine was oddly comforting, no longer just an act for external observers, but a genuine partnership. She recalled the early days of their sham arrangement, feeling a pang of wonder at how far they'd come. That afternoon, Rachel found herself in the staff lounge, taking a rare break. She gazed out a nearby window at the busy Manhattan streets, mind swirling with half-formed plans for the Cooper Fund. Marcus entered, pausing when he saw her alone. He carried 2 bottles of sparkling water, offering one to her. "Thought you might be thirsty," he said softly. She accepted it, gratitude flickering. "Thanks, I was just trying to wrap my head around how quickly everything's changing. A few weeks ago I was still worried about paying off my mother's medical bills." She managed a light laugh. "Now I'm co-managing a fund that might help dozens, maybe hundreds of people." Marcus's expression softened. "I know it's been overwhelming, but you're doing a remarkable job, Rachel." She looked up at him, noticing the strain on his features. "And you're juggling the entire Stone Empire, plus damage control, plus heading the fund. How are you holding up?" He exhaled, gaze distant. "Honestly, I'm tired, but part of me feels lighter, like we're finally building something worth the Stone name." Emboldened by his candor, Rachel reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. The tension between them flared, that old question simmering. Were they merely fulfilling a contract or forging a bond that transcended pretense? As though sensing her thoughts, Marcus squeezed back, a wry smile forming. "I keep thinking about what happens when our contract ends. We never set a plan for what's next, beyond the 6 months." Her chest tightened. She'd avoided confronting that question head-on, dreading the confusion it stirred. "Let's talk about it when we're not so swamped," she murmured, feeling a tinge of guilt. "I'm not trying to avoid it, but—" He nodded, pulling his hand free gently, seemingly shielding himself from disappointment. "I get it. We'll figure it out later." A faint ache remained where their hands had connected, but Rachel forced a reassuring smile. She reminded herself of the mission at hand, mending her father's legacy, turning Stone Enterprises around. Perhaps once the dust settled, they could truly define their relationship. For now, the routine they'd built offered a safe, if tenuous, space for them both. They finished their break, returning to the swirl of corporate demands. Yet beneath the polished veneer of daily tasks, they each carried that silent question: when the contract's terms were fulfilled, would they choose to stay side by side, or would the worlds they once inhabited pull them apart? On a brisk Friday morning, Rachel hurried down a quiet street in Queens, glancing back at Marcus, who was just exiting their hired SUV. They'd come to visit a small printing shop, one of the first applicants to the Robert Cooper Fund, accompanied by Charlotte Hart. The chilly air and the distant hum of traffic offered a refreshing change from the gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan. The shop's exterior was modest, an old brick facade, paint peeling around the window frames. A sign read, "Miranda's Print and Design." Inside, the clang of machinery and the smell of ink filled the air. Charlotte, walking ahead in a tailored coat, waved for them to follow. "Miranda Morales runs this place," Charlotte explained softly. "She's been fighting off an aggressive buyout from a larger competitor. Sound familiar?" Rachel nodded, recognizing the parallels to her father's ordeal. Her pulse quickened with a mix of empathy and determination. She wanted Miranda to know someone was on her side, someone who refused to let history repeat itself. They stepped into the shop, and a petite woman with dark curls emerged from behind a printing press. Miranda Morales's wary expression flickered to curiosity when she spotted Charlotte, and then apprehension when she recognized Marcus Stone. I wasn't expecting you in person," she said, voice tinged with both awe and anxiety. Marcus offered a disarming smile. We believe in understanding applicants face to face. Ms. Morales, may we talk?" Miranda glanced at her staff, two younger employees who hovered uncertainly, then nodded. She led them to a cramped office in the back, the walls plastered with samples of printed flyers and brochures. Charlotte made introductions, then signaled for Miranda to explain her situation. The woman spoke in halting but heartfelt tones. A rival firm had tried to sabotage her contracts with local businesses, pressuring them to switch providers. She lacked the funds to modernize her equipment or expand her client base, leaving her vulnerable. Rachel listened intently, remembering her father's bitter recollections of feeling cornered, powerless. She couldn't help but see glimpses of Robert Cooper's plight in Miranda's story. "Your application mentioned you sought a loan before," Rachel said gently. "They turned you down because they saw this location as too risky, right?" Miranda nodded, eyes downcast. "They said my business model was dated. I just need enough capital to upgrade, reach new clients. I know we can be competitive." Marcus, leaning forward, studied the budget proposals Miranda handed them. "This seems reasonable. You're not asking for a handout, just an investment or bridge loan to stay afloat while you revamp." Miranda exhaled shakily. "Exactly. If I don't get help soon, I'll have to sell, probably to the same people who tried to bully me out of the market." A heavy silence followed. Charlotte and Rachel exchanged looks, both feeling the weight of this woman's predicament. Finally, Marcus set down the papers. "I can't promise immediate approval. It's a committee decision, but the Cooper Fund is designed for cases like yours." He glanced at Rachel. "We'll do everything we can to fast-track this." Tears of relief brimmed in Miranda's eyes. She stammered her thanks, and Charlotte rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll be in touch soon. In the meantime, keep fighting. This place looks full of potential." Back at the Stone Enterprises building that afternoon, Rachel and Marcus briefed Beverly and Andrew on Miranda's situation. Beverly's face lit with the passion of someone who believed in second chances. Andrew, ever the cautious legal mind, questioned the financial specifics. "She still needs to meet the Cooper Fund's criteria," Andrew reminded them. "We must confirm no hidden liabilities." Edgar would jump at any chance to call this philanthropic effort financially reckless. Marcus nodded, leaning on the conference table. "Understood. Get the finance team to do a thorough check, but expedite it. I don't want Miranda waiting indefinitely. Time is critical for her." Rachel's heart swelled at his sincerity. This was the man she'd seen glimpses of, a leader determined to balance business sense with moral responsibility. Perhaps, she thought, this was how Stone Enterprises could redeem itself, one story, one partnership at a time. That evening, while Marcus prepared a late-night strategy call with international investors, Rachel slipped away to a quiet lounge near the penthouse lobby. She dialed Lisa's number, eager to hear a friendly voice. Lisa answered on the second ring, bright and concerned. "Rach, finally! I've been seeing all these headlines about you and Stone Enterprises." "Are you really going around helping small businesses now?" Lisa teased, though admiration colored her tone. Rachel chuckled softly. "Yeah, it's part of the Cooper Fund. I guess it's become my new mission. How are things at the restaurant?" Lisa launched into stories of new hires, rowdy customers, and the owner's attempt to modernize the menu. The familiarity soothed Rachel's spirit. She realized how much she missed that simpler life, though she also recognized she could never fully return to it. Too much had changed. "And how's the marriage?" Lisa asked, her voice gentler. "I know it started off as, an arrangement, but has anything changed?" Rachel hesitated, recalling the many moments of intimacy and tension with Marcus. "It's complicated, Liz. We're closer now. He's not at all like I imagined. But we have so much to handle first." "I can't even define what we are." Lisa offered a sympathetic hum. Don't let it slip away. If there's something real there, fight for it. At those words, Rachel felt a pang in her chest. Yeah, she murmured, eyes misting. I won't forget. They ended the call, and Rachel wandered back to find Marcus in the penthouse study, immersed in conversation with a European associate. He gestured for her to wait, flashing a tired smile that reached his eyes. Even from across the room, she sensed the quiet warmth between them. Perhaps Lisa was right. There was something worth fighting for here, beyond corporate deals and reparation funds. In the stillness of that moment, Rachel realized they were building more than a philanthropic program. They were forging new ties across businesses, families, and maybe their own hearts that promised to reshape both Stone Enterprises and the legacy her father had left behind. 2 months later, the Cooper Fund office bustled with activity on a sunny spring morning. Rachel stepped out of the elevator onto a floor newly dedicated to philanthropic operations. A welcome contrast to the austere corporate floors above. Posters highlighting the success stories of aided businesses lined the walls. Miranda's print and design featured prominently, having received an investment that helped her retool her equipment and safeguard her contracts. Charlotte Hart appeared in the hallway, carrying a bouquet of flowers. For you, Charlotte beamed, extending them to Rachel. You were the driving force behind all this. We're celebrating the Cooper Fund's official launch event tonight, remember? Rachel accepted the flowers, face glowing with pride. Thank you, Charlotte. But this was a team effort. We couldn't have done it without you or Marcus. Speaking of Marcus, Charlotte said with a hint of mischief in her smile, he's waiting for you in the conference room, something about final preparations. Intrigued, Rachel made her way through the lively workspace until she reached the conference room. Inside, she found Marcus standing at the window, gazing down at the city streets. He wore a crisp suit, but his tie hung loosely, suggesting a blend of formality and lingering comfort. You look suspiciously calm, Rachel teased, placing the bouquet on a side table. Usually, you'd be poring over event details until the last minute. He turned, flashing a soft grin. I've learned to trust other people to handle the small stuff, and I trust you, specifically. He gestured for her to come closer, a new warmth lighting his gaze. Her heart fluttered as she stepped toward him. The board, investors, and employees had finally embraced the Cooper Fund after seeing the tangible impact it created. Edgar Coleman had tried multiple times to resurrect rumors and sow doubt, but with each success story, his influence waned. It seemed Marcus's open stance had robbed Edgar of the fear-driven narrative he relied on. "What's on your mind?" she asked, voice gentle. Marcus inhaled deeply, as though summoning courage. A lot, actually. But first, he hesitated, pulling a small envelope from his jacket pocket. I was going through my father's old files, and I found this. It's a letter your father wrote to Henry Stone, never sent. Maybe he wrote it but had second thoughts, or Henry never bothered to respond. I'm not sure, but I thought you should see it. Carefully, Rachel accepted the envelope, opening it with trembling fingers. The letter was dated nearly 2 decades ago. In neat handwriting, Robert Cooper expressed regret about how their partnership ended, lamenting the betrayal, but also acknowledging his hope that the Stone Empire could do better in the future. A lump rose in her throat as she read. Her father's words were surprisingly forgiving, more sorrowful than angry. He wrote, I believe true success is built on fairness and respect. I only hope one day you or your heirs realize that. Tears blurred her vision, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. I never knew he felt this way. He always seemed so bitter, but he still had hope. Marcus placed a comforting palm against her back. That's what we're doing, right? Carrying forward his hope, making Stone Enterprises fair and respectful. She turned to him, wiping her tears, heart brimming with gratitude and something deeper. Thank you. For everything. He lowered his gaze, then looked up with unmistakable tenderness. Rachel, our initial agreement, 6 months, expires soon. But I don't want this to end. Not now, not ever. I know our marriage started as a facade, but... Her breath caught, a swirl of emotions rising. This was the conversation they had both dodged for weeks. But time, and the accomplishments they shared, had forged a bond. Marcus swallowed, continuing with earnest conviction. I've come to realize that He paused, searching her face. I care about you, Rachel, more than I've ever cared for anyone. I don't want a contract. I want a real marriage, built on honesty and... She lifted a hand to his cheek, tears reappearing, but this time they carried relief and joy. I care about you too, she whispered. I never expected it, but here we are. Their gazes locked, and the tension of months melted into a moment of shared clarity. Without further words, they leaned in, sealing their confessions with a tender kiss. When they finally pulled apart, the hum of the office returned, phones ringing, employees bustling, but to Rachel, it felt like a new dawn. She saw in Marcus's eyes a reflection of all they had fought for, redemption, integrity, and genuine affection transcending the shadows of the past. Later that evening, the official launch event for the Cooper Fund unfolded at a nearby community center, unpretentious yet full of life. Families, small business owners, media representatives, and Stone Enterprises staff mingled in a converted auditorium. Large posters showcased the program's achievements, including Miranda's story and several other success cases from across the city. Marcus stood by Rachel's side as they greeted guests. She noticed a subtle shift in people's demeanor, no longer warily sizing them up, but genuinely curious, excited even. Charlotte took the stage to introduce them, praising the vision and resolve behind the fund. Polite applause escalated into fervent cheers as Marcus and Rachel stepped forward. In her short speech, Rachel shared her father's dream of building fair partnerships, concluding with his once unsent words. There were tears in the audience, moved by the raw honesty of a daughter seeking to fulfill her father's unspoken wish. Then Marcus spoke, affirming Stone Enterprises' long-term commitment to the fund, promising ongoing resources and personal involvement. At the event's close, well-wishers crowded around. Among them was Lisa, who had come from Brooklyn to lend her support. She enveloped Rachel in a tight hug, beaming, "I'm so proud of you." "This is huge," Rachel laughed, teary-eyed. "It's crazy, right? I still can't believe any of this." Lisa glanced at Marcus, then back at Rachel, arching a brow knowingly. "Oh, I believe it. Sometimes the strangest beginnings lead to the best outcomes." Rachel couldn't agree more. Standing in the bustling community center, the hum of conversation and the glow of accomplishment all around, Rachel felt truly at peace. She had fought her way through debt, doubt, and old resentments. She had discovered that beneath the polished bravado of a corporate empire, real humanity could shine through. And, most unexpectedly, she had found love amid the rubble of her father's broken dreams. Marcus caught her eye, leaning in to whisper, "We did it. Your dad would be proud." She smiled, tears of joy gathering once again. "I think so too." In that moment, everything felt complete. The circle of past and present closed, leaving them free to build a future together, one defined by empathy, redemption, and a bond that no contract could ever replicate. They walked side by side out of the spotlight into a world that felt brighter and more hopeful than ever before. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.